Get her out of here now. Daniel Carter's voice cut through the lobby like a command no one would question, and before Elena could even set her mop down, a security guard grabbed her arm as if she did not belong in the very space she had been cleaning for months, as if she was nothing more than a problem to remove, not a person standing right in front of them. The cart she had been pushing tipped over, the bucket rattling across the polished marble floor, and the sound echoed louder than it should have, because everyone heard it, and everyone saw it, but no one said a word. Elena did not resist. She did not pull away. She just stood there, steady, her hand still slightly raised from where she had been working, as if time had paused only for her, while the rest of the room moved on without hesitation. Daniel adjusted his suit, barely looking at her, his expression calm, almost bored, like this was routine, like removing her was just another item on his list. "I told you," he said, loud enough for the tenants gathering near the elevators to hear. "We do not keep people who cannot follow basic instructions." A few people glanced at Elena, then quickly looked away, as if eye contact might somehow involve them. One woman whispered something under her breath. Another man pulled out his phone, not to help, but to watch, to capture, to remember this moment in a way Elena never asked for. The guard tightened his grip slightly, not painfully, but firmly enough to make a point, and guided her toward the glass doors. Still, she did not fight. Still, she said nothing. And that silence, that controlled stillness, felt more unsettling than any argument could have been. Because it was not weakness. It was something else. Something no one in that lobby understood. Outside, the sunlight hit her face as the doors closed behind her, cutting off the murmurs, but not the humiliation that lingered in the air. She stood there for a moment, just breathing, her eyes fixed on the reflection of the building in the glass, the same building she had been inside seconds ago, the same building that now seemed to reject her entirely. A gust of wind moved past, catching the edge of her uniform, and for a brief second, it looked like she might walk away, like she might disappear into the city the way people like her often did, unnoticed, unremembered. But she did not move. Instead, she slowly looked down at her hands, still clean, still steady, then back up at the towering structure in front of her. There was no anger on her face, no visible frustration, just a quiet, controlled expression that did not match what had just happened. And that was the first sign something was not right. Inside, Daniel was already speaking to the front desk, his tone casual, dismissive, as if the incident had already been resolved, as if Elena had never mattered in the first place. "Make sure we get someone more reliable," he said, flipping through a folder, not even bothering to check if anyone was listening closely. "I'm not dealing with this again." The receptionist nodded quickly, eager to agree, eager to stay on the safe side of his authority, because in this building, Daniel Carter was the one who decided who stayed and who left. Or at least, that was what everyone believed. Outside, Elena reached into her pocket, her fingers brushing against her phone, but she did not take it out right away. Instead, she looked back through the glass, her gaze steady, almost calculating, as if she was not seeing what everyone else saw, but something deeper, something hidden beneath the surface. A man passing by glanced at her briefly, then kept walking, unaware that he had just crossed paths with someone who did not fit the role she had been forced into moments ago. Finally, Elena pulled out her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second longer than expected, as if she was choosing something carefully, not reacting impulsively, but activating something already decided. Then she made the call. "It is time," she said, her voice low, calm, almost too calm for someone who had just been thrown out of her job in front of a crowd. There was a pause on the other end, just a breath, just enough to suggest that whoever was listening understood exactly what she meant. Elena ended the call without another word. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and took one last look at the building. Inside, everything still looked the same. People moving, doors opening, conversations continuing. Nothing had changed. Not yet. But something had already started, and Daniel Carter had no idea what he had just set in motion. Elena did not leave. She stayed right across the street, standing still as the morning traffic moved around her, as if the entire city had somewhere to go except her, as if she had just been erased from the only place that had defined her routine for months. People passed by without noticing, but inside the building, her absence had already been replaced, already dismissed, already rewritten as if she had never existed. And that was the part that hurt the most, not the removal itself, but how easy it was for everyone to accept it. She watched through the glass as a new cleaner walked in, wearing the same uniform, pushing a cart that looked almost identical to hers. And for a moment, it felt like she was watching her own life being replaced in real time. No hesitation. No questions. Just replacement. Her jaw tightened slightly, but her expression did not break. Because this was not just about losing a job. This was about something deeper. Something that did not make sense yet. Inside, Daniel was laughing with a tenant now, his posture relaxed, his tone light, as if the scene from minutes ago had already faded from his memory. The receptionist avoided looking toward the doors entirely, her focus glued to the computer screen, typing faster than necessary, as if staying busy could erase what she had witnessed. Even the security guard who had escorted Elena out stood straighter now, more alert, more composed, as if correcting himself after stepping slightly out of line earlier. And that shift, that sudden tightening of behavior, did not feel natural. It felt coordinated. Elena narrowed her eyes slightly, not in anger, but in quiet observation. Because something about the timing did not match. The decision had been too fast. The reaction too smooth. As if it had already been decided before she even walked into the lobby that morning. Her mind replayed the moment again, not the humiliation, but the details. The way Daniel did not ask a single question. The way security was already close enough to step in immediately. The way no one seemed surprised. And suddenly, it did not feel like an incident. It felt like a setup. A small crease formed between her brows as that thought settled in. Not fully formed yet, but strong enough to stay. She slowly exhaled, her gaze shifting from the building to the reflection in the glass, where she could see herself standing there, still in uniform, still appearing exactly as they had defined her, and for the first time, she understood something clearly. They had already decided who she was. Long before today. Long before that moment. And they acted accordingly. A black sedan pulled up near the entrance, smooth, quiet, deliberate, and a man stepped out, dressed sharply, his presence commanding attention without saying a word. The doorman immediately straightened, opening the door with more care than usual, and Daniel noticed him instantly, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. That kind of reaction was not given lightly. Elena watched closely, her eyes following every movement. The man walked inside without looking around, as if he already knew exactly where he was going, and Daniel quickly adjusted his jacket, stepping forward to greet him with a level of respect he had not shown anyone else that morning. That contrast was clear. Too clear. Elena tilted her head slightly, studying the interaction, and then something else caught her attention. The new cleaner, the one who had replaced her just minutes ago, was no longer visible. Gone. Just like that. No cart. No presence. No trace. As if they had only been there for a moment, just long enough to fill a gap. Just long enough to complete an image. Her breathing slowed, not out of calm, but out of focus, as the pieces began to shift in her mind. This was not random. This was not about performance. This was not about a mistake. Someone had wanted her removed, and they had made sure it happened cleanly, quietly, publicly. Elena reached into her pocket again, her fingers brushing against her phone, but this time, she did not make a call. Instead, she opened a message thread, her eyes scanning a short line of text that had arrived earlier that morning, one she had almost ignored in the rush of her routine. A number she did not recognize. A message that seemed simple at first. Do not trust what you see today. She stared at it for a second longer, her expression finally shifting, not into fear, not into anger, but into something sharper. Awareness. Because now it was clear. This was not just about being thrown out. This was about being moved, positioned, and someone had known it would happen before she did. Elena read the message again, slower this time, letting each word settle in a way it had not before. Do not trust what you see today. It was too precise to be random, too calm to be a warning sent in panic, and for a brief second, she considered ignoring it, walking away, letting the morning end exactly as it had begun, with silence and distance. But something in her tightened instead, something that refused to accept what had just happened as normal. And before she could stop herself, before she could measure the risk, she moved. She crossed the street, her steps quick but controlled, her eyes locked on the entrance as if the glass doors had not just closed on her minutes ago, A few people glanced at her as she approached, not recognizing her, not remembering her, which somehow made it easier and harder at the same time. The doorman hesitated when he saw her, just for a fraction of a second, long enough to reveal uncertainty, but not long enough to stop her. She walked past him without asking, without slowing down, and that alone was enough to shift the air inside. The lobby felt different now. Not louder, not quieter, just tighter, as if something invisible had adjusted the pressure the moment she stepped back in. The receptionist looked up, her fingers freezing mid-motion, her eyes widening slightly before quickly narrowing into something more cautious. "You cannot be here," she said, her voice lower than before, less confident, as if the words were no longer entirely her own. Elena did not answer. She kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just steady, because she needed to see something, to confirm something, to break the feeling that she had been moved like a piece on a board she could not see. Near the elevators, two security guards stood closer than before, their posture more alert, their gaze sharper, and this time, they did not wait for an order. One of them stepped forward, blocking her path with a practiced motion that did not feel spontaneous. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he said, firm but controlled, as if repeating a line he had already been given. Elena stopped, her eyes lifting to meet his, not with defiance, but with something quieter, something that made him hesitate for a split second longer than he should have. "Why?" she asked, her voice calm, almost soft, but the question landed heavier than expected. Because it was not emotional. It was precise. The guard opened his mouth, then closed it again, his answer not ready, not prepared, and that gap, that tiny crack, told her everything she needed to know. This was not about rules. This was about control. Behind them, Daniel noticed the movement, his expression tightening the moment he recognized her, not in anger, but in something sharper, something closer to irritation mixed with concern. "I thought we were clear," he said, stepping closer, his voice low enough to keep the scene contained, but loud enough to carry authority. Elena turned slightly, facing him now, and for the first time, her composure shifted just enough to show something beneath it. Not fear, not weakness, but awareness. "No," she said quietly. "You were clear." A pause followed. Short, heavy, and in that pause, something unspoken moved between them. Daniel's eyes flickered, just for a moment, as if he was trying to read something he did not expect to see. "Then do not make this harder than it needs to be," he replied, his tone tightening, his patience thinning, because this was not how this was supposed to go. Not anymore. Not after what had already been done. Elena took one step forward. Just one. Small, deliberate, and immediately, the second guard moved as well, faster this time, placing himself closer, closing the distance in a way that made the message clear without needing to say it. That was the moment it shifted. Not because of what they did, but because of how fast they did it. Too fast. Too coordinated. Too prepared. And suddenly, Elena understood something she had not wanted to admit before. She was not just being pushed out. She was being contained. Her breath slowed, her mind racing ahead of her emotions now, connecting pieces she had only started to notice. The message, the timing, the reaction, the control. This was bigger than a manager, bigger than a building. But she had already stepped in, already crossed the line, and there was no quiet way to step back now. The guard's voice came again, firmer this time. "Ma'am, last warning." Elena held his gaze for 1 second. Longer, just long enough to feel the weight of the moment, just long enough to realize that whatever she thought she could test by coming back inside, she had already triggered something else entirely. And somewhere behind Daniel, near the hallway that led to the private offices, a door opened slightly, just enough for someone to watch, just enough for Elena to feel it, and in that instant, she knew she had just made a move she was not supposed to make. The door in the hallway did not open fully, just enough for a figure to step into the light without making a sound, and somehow that silence carried more weight than Daniel's voice ever could. Elena felt it before she fully saw him, a shift in the room, a subtle tightening in the way people stood, in the way conversations stopped without being told to stop. The guards straightened immediately, not out of fear, but out of recognition, and Daniel's expression changed in a way Elena had not seen before, not arrogance, not irritation, but something closer to restraint. That alone was enough to tell her everything she needed to know. This man did not need to raise his voice. He did not need to explain himself. The room adjusted to him automatically. Elena's eyes lifted, slowly, meeting his presence without fully meeting his gaze, because something about him made direct eye contact feel like a mistake she could not afford. He was not older, not imposing in a physical sense, but there was something controlled about him, something precise, like every movement had already been measured before it happened. He glanced at Daniel first, just a brief look, but it was enough to silence whatever Daniel had been about to say next. Then his attention shifted, not directly to Elena, but close enough that she felt it land. Not curiosity, not judgment, just awareness. And somehow, that felt worse. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice even, almost quiet, but it carried across the lobby without effort, without force. Daniel cleared his throat quickly, stepping forward half a pace, eager to regain control of the situation. "No problem," he said, too quickly, too cleanly, as if rehearsed. "Just handling a staff issue." Staff issue. Elena heard the words clearly, but they did not feel real anymore. Not in this moment. Not with the way the room had shifted. The man did not respond immediately. He just looked at Daniel for a second longer than expected, and in that pause, something invisible passed between them, something Elena could not hear, but could feel. A line. A boundary. A reminder. Then, finally, his gaze moved again, this time landing directly on Elena. It was not aggressive, not dismissive, just still, and that stillness made it impossible to hide anything behind it. Elena held her posture, her breathing steady, her expression controlled, but inside, something tightened in a way she could not ignore. Because this was different. This was not about being underestimated anymore. This was about being seen, and she was not ready for that. "You should leave," he said, calmly, not as a threat, not as a suggestion, but as a fact already decided. No anger, no urgency, just certainty. Elena did not move. Not right away. Her mind raced through every detail, every moment from the morning, trying to understand how she had ended up here, standing in front of someone who clearly operated on a level she had not accounted for. She had come back to test something, to confirm a suspicion, but now, she was standing inside something much larger, something structured, something controlled. And she was out of position. The guard beside her shifted slightly, not touching her, but close enough to remind her that she was no longer choosing what happened next. Around them, no one spoke. No one moved. Even the smallest sounds had disappeared, replaced by a silence that did not feel natural. It felt enforced. Elena finally took a step back. Just one. Not out of fear, but out of recognition. Because for the first time, she understood the scale of what she was dealing with. This was not just a building. Not just management. Not just authority in the way she had seen before. This was a system, and she had stepped into it without knowing the rules. The man did not follow her movement. He did not need to. The moment had already ended the second he spoke. Elena turned slightly, her eyes lingering for just a fraction of a second longer, not on him, but on the space around him, the way everything aligned without question, the way control did not need to be proven, because it was already understood. Then she walked, back toward the doors, back into the sunlight. But this time, it felt different. Not like she had been pushed out, but like she had been allowed to leave. And that realization settled heavily in her chest, because it meant something far worse. It meant she had not lost control. She had never had it to begin with. The city noise came back all at once as Elena stepped away from the building. Cars passing, people talking, footsteps echoing on the sidewalk, but none of it felt real, not compared to the silence she had just walked out of. That silence stayed with her, sitting heavy in her chest, not as fear, not as confusion, but as something sharper, something clearer. She kept walking, not looking back this time, not slowing down, because she knew if she stopped, even for a second, the weight of it all might pull her back into the same place she had just escaped from. But escape was not the right word. She knew that now. You do not escape something you were never allowed to control. You just step out of it. For now. Her steps slowed as she reached the corner, the reflection of the building fading behind her, replaced by storefront windows, passing faces, normal life continuing as if nothing had happened. And that was the part that twisted inside her the most. How easily the world kept moving. How easily people accepted what they saw without asking why. She thought about the way Daniel had spoken, the way the guards had moved, The way that man, that quiet, controlled presence, had ended everything without raising his voice. Not one person questioned it. Not one person hesitated. Because to them, it made sense. It fit the story they had already decided she belonged in. Cleaner. Replaceable. Invisible. Elena stopped walking. Just for a moment. Her hand tightened slightly at her side. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough for her to feel it. Because something inside her was shifting, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, like a line being drawn where there had never been one before. She had spent months inside that building, moving quietly, observing without being seen, listening without being heard. And now, suddenly, everything she thought she understood about that place felt incomplete. No, not incomplete. Controlled. She exhaled slowly, her mind moving through the morning again, but this time, not as a victim replaying a moment, but as someone looking for patterns. The timing of her removal, the message, the presence of that man, the way the system responded, not reacted. It was too clean, too precise. And that meant one thing. It had been planned. Maybe not every detail, but enough. Enough to ensure the outcome. Her phone felt heavier in her pocket now, not because of the device itself, but because of what it represented. Information. A thread. A starting point. She pulled it out again, her eyes returning to the message, reading it for the third time, and this time, she did not question it. She accepted it. Do not trust what you see today. Her lips pressed together slightly, a quiet acknowledgement forming in her mind. Because now she understood. What she saw was not truth. It was presentation. A version of reality designed to keep people in place. And she had just stepped outside of it. That was why it felt wrong. That was why it felt dangerous. A bus passed by, the wind brushing against her, pulling her attention back for a brief second, but her focus did not break. It sharpened. Because for the first time since this morning began, she was no longer reacting. She was thinking. And thinking meant something had changed. She turned slightly, looking back down the street, not directly at the building, but in its direction, as if measuring the distance, not in feet, but in control. She was still on the outside. Still without access. Still without leverage. That had not changed. But something else had. She was no longer willing to accept the role they had given her. Not because she suddenly had power. She did not. Not yet. But because she could see the structure now. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Her thumb moved slowly across the screen, opening another contact, one she had not used in a long time, one she had avoided for reasons she did not want to think about before today. She hesitated. Just for a second. Because this was the moment. The line. The point where walking away was still possible. Where she could choose to disappear back into the life they expected her to live. Quiet. Unnoticed. Safe. Where she could step forward. Into something uncertain. Something controlled by people far more powerful than her. Her grip tightened slightly around the phone, her breath steady, her eyes no longer searching, no longer uncertain. Because the choice, once it appeared, was not really a choice at all. She pressed the call button. And as the line began to ring, Elena did not look back at the building again. She did not need to. Because this time, she was not walking away from it. She was choosing to go back. On her own terms. The line connected on the third ring. And Elena did not speak first. Not this time. Not anymore. Because she had already learned something important in the last hour. The one who speaks first gives away position. She listened instead, letting the silence stretch just long enough to shift control. Just long enough to feel the weight of the person on the other end. I was wondering when you would call. The voice said, calm, familiar, not surprised. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition, because that meant something had already been set in motion long before she picked up the phone. You sent the message, she replied, her tone even, not asking, just confirming. A pause. Then, I made sure you saw it. Not why, not how, just that. Elena let that sit for a moment, her mind already moving ahead, already mapping what this meant. Someone inside the system had reached out. Quietly, carefully, which meant there were cracks. Small ones, but real. You knew this would happen, she said, softer now, not accusing, but aligning the pieces. I knew you were about to be moved, the voice answered, and that word again, moved, landed differently this time, clearer, sharper. Not fired, not removed, positioned. Elena turned slightly, leaning against the side of a building across the street, her gaze drifting back toward the entrance, but not directly, not obviously. She watched the rhythm instead. The doorman opening doors. The receptionist answering calls. The security shifting positions every few minutes. Patterns. Everything had a pattern. Then tell me how it works, she said quietly. Another pause. Longer this time. No, the voice replied, calm but firm. Watch it. The line went dead. Elena lowered the phone slowly, not frustrated, not confused, just focused. Because that answer told her more than any explanation could. If she wanted to understand, she had to see it herself. No shortcuts. No instructions. Just observation. She pushed herself off the wall and began to move again, but this time, not aimlessly. Intentionally. She crossed to the corner of the street where a small coffee stand sat, just far enough from the building to feel like distance, but close enough to maintain a clear line of sight. She ordered nothing. Just stood there, watching. Minutes passed. Then more. And slowly, the building began to reveal itself, not through what it showed, but through what it repeated. The same man entering at exactly 10:15. The same delivery truck pulling up every 40 minutes. The same guard rotating positions, never overlapping, never leaving a gap. Precision, control, structure. Elena's eyes followed every movement, every shift, every subtle interaction that most people would ignore. And then she saw it. A small detail. Easy to miss. The receptionist hesitated every time a certain call came in, her posture tightening slightly before transferring it. Not random. Not emotional. Patterned. Elena's fingers tapped lightly against her arm, her mind locking onto that detail. Because patterns meant entry points. And entry points meant opportunity. She pulled out her phone again, scrolling quickly, searching for something she had seen before, something she had not paid attention to at the time. A number. A schedule. A record. It took a moment, but then she found it. A maintenance log from weeks ago, one she had accessed briefly while cleaning an office, one she had not thought about until now. The number matched. Not exactly, but close enough. Her breath slowed, her focus narrowing. This was it. Not power. Not yet. But access. She dialed the number, her heart steady, her expression unchanged, even as the line began to ring. Once. Twice. Then it connected. Front desk. A voice answered automatically. Elena did not rush. This is building maintenance, she said, her tone calm, controlled, matching the rhythm she had just observed. There is a delay on the scheduled inspection. It needs to be pushed back 30 minutes. A pause. Just a second. Just enough for doubt. Then, hold on. Elena waited, her eyes still on the building, watching as the receptionist inside shifted slightly, picking up a call, her posture tightening exactly as expected. A few seconds later, the voice returned. Okay, it is updated. Click. The line ended. Elena lowered the phone slowly, her gaze lifting toward the entrance. Again. And then she saw it. The delivery truck that always arrived at the same time did not move. It waited. 30 seconds. Then a full minute. A small disruption, barely noticeable to anyone else. But to Elena, it was everything. Because for the first time since this began, something inside that system had changed because of her. The truck did not move when it was supposed to, and that single delay, barely noticeable to anyone else, felt like a signal echoing through the structure Elena had just begun to understand. She stayed still, her eyes fixed on the entrance, not reacting, not revealing anything. Because this was no longer about what she did next, it was about what they would do. And that was when it shifted. Inside the building, the rhythm adjusted. Not dramatically, not enough for a casual observer to notice. But Elena saw it. One of the guards stepped out of position too early. The receptionist picked up a call before the phone fully rang. Daniel reappeared near the entrance, his posture tighter, his movements sharper, as if something small had disrupted his control. Elena's fingers stilled against her arm. Because that meant the system had felt it. Even something this small. Even something this precise. Her breath slowed, her focus narrowing further, because now she was no longer testing blindly. Now she was being measured in return. The glass doors opened again, and the same man stepped into view, the one who had ended everything earlier without effort, without noise. But this time, something was different. He did not move past the lobby immediately. He stopped, just for a second, his gaze sweeping across the space, not searching randomly, but scanning with purpose. Elena felt it before she fully understood it, that subtle shift, that invisible line being drawn between observation and attention. She did not look away, but she did not look directly either. Instead, she adjusted her position slightly, turning just enough to blend back into the movement of the street, her reflection now layered between passing cars and shifting light, harder to isolate, harder to define. Because she understood something now. Attention was not neutral. Attention was risk. Inside, the man's posture remained unchanged, but there was a pause in his movement that had not been there before. A delay, a calculation. And then, slowly, his head turned, not fully, not obviously, but just enough. Enough to align with where she stood across the street. Elena's chest tightened, not out of fear, but out of awareness. Because this was the moment she had not planned for. The moment where the system did not just react. It noticed. She lowered her gaze slightly, letting a group of pedestrians pass between her and the building, her body shifting with the flow, her presence dissolving into something less defined. But her mind stayed sharp, tracking every second, every movement. The doors opened again. The truck finally moved. The guard returned to position. And just like that, the rhythm restored itself. Clean. Controlled. As if nothing had happened. But Elena knew better now. Because that pause, that single moment of disruption, had been seen. Measured. And now, it was being traced. She turned slightly, stepping away from the corner, not retreating, but repositioning, her steps casual, her pace steady, her eyes no longer fixed on the building, but aware of it in her periphery. Because she understood something new now. This was no longer a one-sided observation. This was a loop. She watched them. And now, they watched her. Her phone buzzed softly in her hand. A message. No number. No name. Just a single line. You are not supposed to be there. Elena stopped for half a second, her fingers tightening slightly around the device, her mind processing the words not as a warning, but as confirmation. Because this was no longer about guessing. This was proof. Proof that her presence had been detected, that her action had not gone unnoticed, that the system she had just touched had reached back. She lifted her eyes slowly, not toward the building, but toward the reflection in a nearby window, catching just a glimpse of the entrance behind her without turning fully. And for the briefest moment, she saw it. Not clearly, not directly, but enough. The man was still there, not moving, not speaking, just watching. Not her face, not her position, but her pattern, her difference. Elena exhaled quietly, her expression returning to neutral, her posture relaxed, but inside, everything had shifted again. Because she was no longer invisible. And in a system built on control, being seen was not an advantage. It was a test, a challenge, a question waiting for an answer. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and kept walking. Her pace unchanged, her path blending into the flow of the city once more. But this time, she was not just observing patterns. She was becoming one. And somewhere behind her, inside that building, someone had already begun to ask the only question that mattered. Why was she different? Elena kept walking, but slower now, not because she was tired, but because something inside her had shifted again, deeper this time, heavier, like a truth she had not wanted to face was finally catching up to her. The message still echoed in her mind. You are not supposed to be there. And the more she thought about it, the less it sounded like a warning, and the more it felt like a rule she had unknowingly broken. Not by accident, not by mistake, but by design. She stopped near a narrow side street, just out of the main flow, where the noise softened slightly, where she could think without being watched too closely, or at least that was what she told herself. Her reflection in a dark window caught her attention. Not the uniform, not the posture, but the expression. It was different now. Not confused, not hurt, focused, because the pieces were starting to connect in a way she could not ignore anymore. She reached into her pocket again, pulling out her phone, scrolling back through old messages, old logs, anything that might have seemed irrelevant before, but now carried weight. And then she saw it. A maintenance request from 3 days ago, flagged as urgent, assigned specifically to her. She had not questioned it at the time. It was routine, just another task. But now, looking at it again, something felt off. The location, the timing, the authorization code. It did not match the standard format. It was subtle, easy to overlook, but not random. Her fingers hovered over the screen as her memory replayed that day. The hallway she had been sent to, the office that had been empty when she arrived, the door that had been slightly open, just enough for her to step inside without hesitation. And inside, nothing broken, nothing needing repair, just a desk, clean, organized, and one file left open, not hidden, not secured, just there, visible, waiting. She had not touched it. Not really. Just glanced. Just enough to register names, numbers, ownership details that had not made sense to her. At the time, she had walked out of that room thinking it was a mistake. But now, it did not feel like a mistake anymore. It felt like placement. Elena's breath slowed as that realization settled in, not as a shock, but as something colder, something more controlled. She had not been sent there to fix something. She had been sent there to see something. Or worse, to be seen. Her grip tightened slightly around the phone, her jaw setting just enough to mark the shift from confusion to something sharper. Anger. Not loud, not explosive, but quiet, focused, directed. Because this was no longer about being disrespected. This was about being used. A pawn, moved into position without knowing the game, without knowing the rules, without even knowing she was part of it. And that was the part that burned. Not the humiliation, not the removal, but the realization that none of it had been random. That every step, every moment, had been part of something larger she could not fully see yet. A car passed by, pulling her attention back for a second, but her mind did not let go of the thread. She opened the maintenance log again, this time tracing the authorization code more carefully, her eyes narrowing as she compared it to other entries. It stood out now, clearly, deliberately, different, which meant someone had created it. Someone inside the system. Someone who knew exactly how to make it look normal. And that meant the message she received earlier was not the beginning. It was a continuation. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Same unknown number. Did you remember the office? Elena did not reply immediately. She did not need to. Because the answer was already there, sitting heavy in her chest, in the tightness of her grip, in the clarity of her thoughts. She remembered. And now she understood why. Her eyes lifted slowly, scanning the street, not searching for a person, but for a pattern, for a sign that the system was still watching, still adjusting, still moving pieces she had not yet identified. Because if she had been placed once, she could be placed again. And this time, she would not walk in blindly. Her reflection stared back at her, steadier now, sharper, no longer uncertain. Because the pain had changed. It had hardened. It had direction. But even as that, clarity settled in. One thought refused to let go, one question that felt heavier than all the rest. If she had been moved into position before, then who was still moving the pieces now? Elena did not move right away after reading the message, her eyes fixed on the screen, her mind already shifting from reaction to calculation, because now she understood something that changed everything. If someone had placed her before, then the system had blind spots, and blind spots could be used. She exhaled slowly, her thoughts narrowing into something precise, something intentional, no longer scattered, no longer emotional. This was no longer about what had been done to her. This was about what she could do next. She turned slightly, stepping deeper into the side street, away from the main flow, not hiding, just repositioning, because visibility was no longer her advantage, control was. Her fingers moved across the phone again, pulling up the maintenance log, not to review it, but to use it. She studied the authorization code one more time, memorizing its structure, the subtle difference that made it stand out, because if someone had created a false entry once, then the system was capable of accepting it again. And that meant one thing. It could be replicated. Her pulse remained steady, her breathing even, as she opened a new request form through an internal access point she still technically had, one that had not yet been revoked, or maybe had been intentionally left open. That thought lingered for a second, but she did not stop. She typed carefully, matching the format, matching the tone, matching the pattern she had observed earlier, not rushing, not hesitating. Every detail mattered now. Every small error could expose her. Maintenance delay, access required, internal inspection. She entered, adjusting the code just enough to mirror the anomaly she had seen before, not copying it exactly, but echoing it. Then she paused, just for a second, because this was the moment. The difference between observing and acting, between being moved and choosing to move. She pressed submit. Nothing happened immediately. No alert. No rejection. Just silence. Elena lowered the phone slowly, her eyes lifting toward the building again, not directly, but through reflection, through angles, through movement, because she was not watching for obvious change anymore. She was watching for disruption. 10 seconds passed. Then 20. Then, inside the building, something shifted. Subtle. Small. But real. The receptionist paused mid-call, her expression tightening slightly as she glanced at her screen. One of the guards adjusted his position earlier than expected, and near the back hallway, the same door that had opened before moved again. Elena's fingers curled slightly at her side, not in tension, but in recognition. It worked. Not fully, not completely, but enough. Enough to create a ripple. Enough to insert herself, however briefly, into a system that had already decided she did not belong. Her chest rose and fell slowly, her focus sharpening even further, because now she had something she did not have before. Influence. Small. Fragile. But real. And that changed everything. But it also changed the risk. Because systems like this did not ignore disruption. They traced it. Inside, Daniel appeared again, his steps faster this time, his posture tighter, his attention fixed on something unseen, something internal, and for the first time, he did not look in control. Not completely. Elena watched him closely, not with satisfaction, not with victory, but with precision, because this was not about winning. Not yet. This was about understanding how far she could go before the system pushed back. A black sedan door opened again, and the same man stepped out once more, his presence unchanged, his pace steady, but this time, he did not move directly inside. He stopped near the entrance, his head tilting slightly, as if listening to something beneath the surface, something others could not detect. Elena felt it immediately. That shift, that awareness. Her breath slowed, her body still, because she understood now. This was the cost of influence. The moment you change something, you become visible. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Same number. You should stop. Elena stared at the words, her expression unreadable, her thoughts moving faster now, sharper, because this was not just a warning anymore. This was acknowledgement. She had done something. Something real enough to be noticed. Something dangerous enough to be questioned. She lifted her eyes once more, catching the reflection of the building behind her, and this time, she did not look away. Because for the first time since this began, she was no longer standing outside the system. She was inside it. Even if just barely. Even if just for a moment. And somewhere within that structure, someone else had already started to follow the disturbance she created, tracing it back, step by step, until it reached the one person who was never supposed to be part of the game. The message stayed on her screen longer than it should have. You should stop. And for the first time since she made her move, Elena felt it. Not doubt, not regret, but pressure, real pressure, the kind that did not come from fear, but from knowing she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. She lifted her eyes slowly, scanning the building again, but this time, the pattern did not feel the same. It felt tighter, faster, adjusted. Inside, Daniel was no longer pacing. He was on the phone, his voice low, controlled, but urgent in a way that did not match his earlier confidence. The receptionist no longer hesitated. She moved immediately, efficiently, no delay, no pause. And the guards, they were no longer rotating with subtle precision. They were holding position, watching, not the entrance, not the crowd, something else, someone else. Elena's chest tightened slightly, her breath no longer as steady as before, because she understood what that meant. They were no longer responding to a system error. They were responding to a person, to her. Her fingers curled around her phone as another notification appeared, not a message this time, but an access alert. Her credentials, revoked, instantly, cleanly, no warning, no explanation, just gone. The small window she had used, the fragile thread she had pulled, it disappeared in a second, as if it had never existed. Her advantage, the one thing she had just gained, erased without hesitation. Elena's jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration breaking through her control for the first time, because this was not just correction. This was retaliation. Fast, precise, intentional. She turned slightly, stepping further away from the building, but her pace was no longer casual, no longer measured. It was controlled urgency now, the kind that came from realizing you had underestimated the speed of something much larger than you. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. Same number. You moved too soon. Elena stopped walking. Just for a second. The words hit differently now, not as advice, not as guidance, but as a statement of fact. She had not just been seen. She had been predicted. Her mind raced back through every step she had taken, every decision. Every moment she thought she was ahead, and one thought cut through all of it. They were not reacting to her. They were already waiting for her. A car pulled up beside the curb near her, dark tinted windows, engine running. Not unusual, not suspicious, but something about the timing, the stillness, made her pulse spike just enough to notice. She did not look directly. She did not stop again, but she felt it. That shift, that attention. Her grip on the phone tightened as she kept moving, her eyes forward, her posture steady, but inside, everything was calculating, adjusting, searching for an exit, for space, for distance. Because this was no longer a test. This was containment. Behind her, the building stood unchanged, calm, controlled, as if nothing had happened at all, but Elena knew better now. The disruption had been closed. The system had corrected itself. And she had been identified. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, the message was different. No number, no thread, just a blank notification that opened to a single line. Last warning. Elena's breath caught for half a second, not from fear, but from the weight of what that meant. This was no longer a game she could step in and out of. This was no longer something she could observe from the outside. She was inside it now, fully, whether she wanted to be or not. She slowed slightly, her steps losing just a fraction of their rhythm, because for the first time since she decided to fight back, the cost became real. Not abstract, not distant, immediate, and heavy. Her reflection in a passing window caught her eye again, but this time, she did not see control. She saw the edge of something else. Pressure, isolation, the realization that every move she made was not just seen, but countered, adjusted, erased. And that no matter how careful she thought she was still playing on their ground, under their rules. Her hand lowered slowly, the phone still in her grip, but her thoughts no longer sharp, no longer precise, just heavy. Because for the first time since this began, she was not thinking about her next move. She was questioning if she had won it all. And as that thought settled in, quiet and dangerous, Elena felt something she had not allowed herself to feel before. Not defeat. Not yet. But something close enough to it that it made her stop in the middle of the street, surrounded by people who had no idea that everything around her had just closed in. And for a moment, just a moment, it felt like she was one step away from breaking completely. Elena did not remember how long she stood there. The noise of the city moved around her, voices blending into a distant hum, footsteps passing, doors opening and closing, but none of it reached her fully, not anymore. It was as if something inside her had gone quiet, not peaceful, not calm, just empty. Her hand loosened around the phone, the screen dimming slowly, the last message still there, frozen, like everything else. Last warning. The words no longer felt sharp. They felt heavy, final. She inhaled slowly, but the breath did not go deep. It stopped halfway, caught somewhere between her chest and her throat, like her body had forgotten how to move forward. And for the first time since this began, she did not think about strategy. She did not analyze patterns. She did not look for the next step. She just stood there. And in that stillness, everything came back at once. The moment her cart hit the floor, the way the lobby went silent, the way no one stepped forward, the way she was removed like she had never belonged there. Not just the action, but the feeling behind it. The certainty, the ease, as if her existence had no weight. Her eyes lowered slightly, not to the ground, but to nothing in particular, her focus drifting inward, because now there was no system to observe, no movement to track, just the quiet truth settling deeper than anything else. She had been wrong. Not about the system, not about the patterns, but about herself. She thought she could step into it and remain separate. Thought she could observe, test, adjust. Thought she could control something that had already defined her role before she even realized it. And now, standing there, with her access gone, her position exposed, her moves countered before they even fully formed, she felt it clearly. She had not just lost ground. She had never had it. Her shoulders lowered slightly, not in defeat, but in release, as if holding tension no longer made sense. A quiet exhale followed, longer this time, slower, as the pressure inside her shifted from resistance to recognition. Because this was the lowest point. Not the moment she was thrown out. Not the moment her access was cut. But this. The moment where nothing she thought she could rely on was still there. No control. No advantage. No certainty. Just her. And for a second, just a second, the thought came, simple and dangerous. Maybe this is where it ends. Maybe this is where you step back. Walk away. Let it go. The idea did not feel weak. It felt reasonable. Safe. A way out of something she clearly did not fully understand. Her fingers twitched slightly at her side. The smallest movement. Almost unnoticeable, but enough to break the stillness just a little. Because something else followed that thought. Not loud. Not immediate. But there. Persistent. If you walk away now, then everything they decided about you becomes true. The words did not come from outside. They did not echo like the messages on her phone. They formed quietly, inside her own mind, steady, controlled, impossible to ignore. She closed her eyes briefly, not to escape, but to listen. Because for the first time since all of this started, the noise was gone. No system, no pressure, no observation. Just one question. Who decides what happens next? Her eyes opened again, slowly, her gaze lifting just enough to catch her reflection in the glass beside her. And this time, she did not look away. Not from the uniform. Not from the position she had been placed in. Not from the reality of where she stood. Because none of that had changed. She was still outside. Still exposed. Still without power. But something else had shifted. Something quieter. Stronger. She straightened slightly. Not dramatically. Not enough for anyone else to notice. But enough for herself to feel it. Because this time, she was not looking for control over the system. She was looking for control over her next move. Her hand lifted slowly, the phone still in her grip, the screen lighting up again, the messages still there, unchanged. She stared at them for a moment longer, then moved her thumb, not to reply, not to react, but to scroll past them entirely. Past the warnings. Past the noise. Back to the data. The logs. The patterns. Because if she had been placed once, then there were more placements. More movements. More pieces. And somewhere in that structure, there was a position that was not defined for her yet. Her breath steadied, deeper this time, more controlled, as her mind began to move again, not fast, not reactive, but deliberate, quiet, focused, because she understood something now that she had not understood before. This was not about forcing control. This was about finding where it already existed and stepping into it. Her eyes lifted one last time, not toward the building, not toward the people, but forward, towards something unseen, something not yet defined. And in that moment, without saying a word, without making a visible move, Elena made a decision she could not take back. She was not done. Elena did not rush anymore. That was the first thing that changed. Not her position, not her resources, just her pace. She stood there for a moment longer, not because she was unsure, but because she no longer felt the need to move immediately. Urgency had been replaced by something quieter, something far more dangerous. Control. Her fingers rested lightly against the phone, but she did not look at it right away. The messages were still there, the warnings, the patterns, the traces of everything that had just happened. But for the first time, she did not feel pulled by them. She felt above them. Not in power. Not yet. But in perspective. Because now she understood something she had missed before. Information was not about what was given. It was about what was withheld. She lifted her eyes slowly, scanning the street again. But this time, not searching for movement, not reacting to disruption. She was measuring space. Distance. Angles. Where people stood. Where they paused. Where they did not look. Because what people avoided often mattered more than what they showed. A man walked past her, talking on his phone, his tone casual, unaware, but his path shifted slightly as he approached the building, instinctively giving it space. Not fear, respect, or something close to it. Elena noticed. Filed it away. Another detail. Another pattern. Everything was data now. Everything had weight. She began to walk again, but slower than before, her steps deliberate, her posture relaxed, blending into the rhythm of the city without losing awareness of it. Because blending was not weakness. It was positioning. Her reflection appeared briefly in a storefront window, and this time, she studied it, not emotionally, not critically, but analytically. The uniform, the posture, the way she held herself. It all told a story. A predictable one. A controllable one. And that was the problem. She had been easy to define. Easy to place. Easy to remove. That would not happen again. Her hand moved, adjusting the sleeve slightly. A small gesture. Almost meaningless, but intentional. Because identity was not just what you were. It was what people believed you were. And beliefs could be changed. Carefully. Gradually. She reached into her pocket again, pulling out her phone, but instead of opening the messages, she opened something else. A contact list. Names she had ignored before. Numbers she had not used. Connections that had seemed unnecessary. Until now. Her eyes moved across the screen, not searching randomly, but scanning with purpose, identifying potential, not familiarity. Because trust was no longer a factor. Only value. She paused on one name. Not because she liked it. Not because she trusted it. But because it connected to something she had seen earlier. A small overlap. A shared thread. Enough to matter. Enough to test. Her thumb hovered for a second, then moved. Not calling. Not yet. Just opening the details. Reviewing. Mapping. Understanding. Because every move now had to be intentional. Every action had to serve a purpose beyond the moment. She lowered the phone again, her gaze lifting toward the building one more time. But this time, she did not feel pulled toward it. She did not feel small in front of it. She saw it differently now. Not as a place, not as a structure, but as a system. Layers of control, layers of access, layers of information. And like any system, it had entry points. Not obvious ones, not easy ones, but real. She just had to find them. And more importantly, she had to become the kind of person who could use them. Her breathing remained steady, her thoughts no longer racing, just moving, step by step, building something new, something stronger than reaction, stronger than emotion. Strategy. The words settled quietly in her mind, not as a concept, but as a direction. Because reacting had cost her everything. But thinking had given her something back. Even if it was small, even if it was fragile, it was enough. She turned away from the building. Fully this time, not out of defeat, not out of avoidance, but because she no longer needed to stand there to understand it. She had seen enough. For now, her steps carried her down the street, blending into the flow of people again. But something about her had shifted in a way that could not be undone. She was no longer moving through the city the same way. She was reading it, calculating it, using it. And as she walked, her phone buzzed again. A new message lighting up the screen, but she did not check it immediately. She let it wait, just for a few seconds. Because for the first time, she understood something clearly. Not every message deserved an answer. Not every move required a reaction. And not every threat needed to be acknowledged. She finally glanced down, her eyes scanning the words quickly, her expression unchanged, but her mind already processing, already placing it into a larger pattern. Then she locked the screen. No response. No hesitation. Just silence. Controlled. Intentional. And as she continued walking, disappearing into the movement of the city, there was one thing that had become undeniable, not to the system, not yet, but to herself. She was not the same person who had stood in that lobby anymore. Not even close. Elena did not go back to the building. Not yet. That would have been predictable. And predictable meant controlled. Instead, she stopped 2 blocks away, near a quiet office supply store with large glass windows, the kind people rarely noticed, the kind that reflected more than it revealed. She stood just inside, pretending to browse, but her attention was elsewhere, focused, precise. Because this time, she was not reacting to the system. She was preparing to enter it on her terms. Her phone rested lightly in her hand as she reopened the contact she had studied earlier, the one with the subtle connection. The one that linked back to the maintenance logs and the authorization codes that did not quite fit. A mid-level operations coordinator. Not powerful, not visible, but connected to flow. And flow meant access. She did not call immediately. She read every available detail. Employment history. Internal timing patterns. When they logged in. When they responded. When they delayed. Patterns again. Always patterns. And then she moved. Not fast. Not hesitant. Just exact. She stepped outside the store and dialed. The line rang once, twice, Then connected. Operations desk. A voice answered, neutral, routine. Elena did not introduce herself. That would have placed her. Instead, she matched the tone, the rhythm, the expectation. There is a discrepancy in this morning's maintenance override, she said calmly, her voice steady, controlled, not asking, but stating. A pause followed, just enough to create tension. What override? The voice asked, slightly sharper now. Good. That meant engagement. Elena glanced at her screen, as if confirming something, even though she already knew. The delayed inspection tied to the North Corridor log. The authorization code is inconsistent with standard protocol. It flagged automatically. She let the words sit. Not too long. Just enough. Because doubt was more powerful than accusation. On the other end, silence stretched for a second longer than expected. Then a shift. Hold on. Elena did not move. Her eyes lifted slightly, catching the reflection of the street behind her, watching movement without reacting to it. Because now, she was inside the system again. Not physically, but structurally. 30 seconds passed. Then the voice returned, but different now. Tighter. Controlled. That log was already cleared. Elena allowed a small pause before responding, as if processing. Cleared after it was flagged, she said quietly. Not a question. A correction. Another silence. Longer this time. Because now, the problem was not the log. The problem was the timing. And timing was where systems broke. Who is this? The voice asked. Elena did not answer directly. Instead, she shifted slightly, her tone lowering just enough to change the weight of her words. If it was cleared correctly, I would not be calling. She let that sit. Because now, she was not asking for access. She was creating pressure. Controlled. Directed. Strategic. The kind that forced a response without revealing position. On the other end, a breath. Then, what do you need? There it was. Not resistance. Not dismissal. Compliance. Small. Fragile. But real. Elena's eyes softened slightly, not with emotion, but with recognition. This was the entry point. Verification, she said simply. I need to confirm the source of the original authorization. A pause. Then typing. Fast. Quiet. Focused. Elena remained still, her breathing steady, her posture relaxed. But inside, every detail was being tracked. Every second measured. Because this was the moment where the system either accepted her or rejected her completely. It came from internal routing, the voice said finally. Unlisted channel. Elena's fingers tightened slightly around the phone. Unlisted. That meant hidden. That meant controlled access beyond standard structure. That meant exactly what she needed. But she did not react. Not yet. Send me the routing reference, she said, her tone unchanged, as if this was routine, expected. Another pause. Shorter this time. Then a notification appeared on her screen. A file. Small. Simple. But powerful. Elena ended the call without another word. No thanks. No confirmation. Just silence. Because in this system, acknowledgement was unnecessary. She stepped back into the flow of the street, her phone still in her hand, the file open now, her eyes scanning the data quickly, efficiently. And as she read, something shifted again. The routing reference did not just point to a system. It pointed to a layer above it. A channel that bypassed standard control. A pathway used only when visibility was not allowed. Elena's breath slowed, her focus sharpening even further. Because this was not just access. This was leverage. Real leverage. And for the first time since this began, the balance moved. Not dramatically. Not completely. But enough. Enough to change the direction. She closed the file slowly, her expression calm, controlled, but her mind already moving ahead, already calculating the next step, the next pressure point, the next move. Because now, she was no longer outside the system. She was inside its blind spot. And that was something they did not expect. Elena did not expect him to come to her. That was the first shift. She had calculated entry points, pressure lines, blind spots within the system, but she had not expected the system itself to step outside its structure. And yet, as she turned the corner, leaving the quieter street behind, she saw the black sedan again, parked this time, engine off, waiting. Not hidden, not subtle, intentional. Her steps slowed, not out of hesitation, but adjustment. Because this was no longer observation. This was engagement. The door opened before she reached it. Not abruptly. Smooth. Controlled. And he stepped out, the same presence, the same stillness, but now there was no distance between them, no glass, no reflection, no barrier to soften the weight of his attention. Elena felt it immediately, sharper this time, direct, focused, like a line had been drawn and she had just crossed it. Without being told where it was. She stopped a few feet away, not too close, not too far, her posture relaxed, her expression neutral, but her awareness fully engaged, every detail registering at once. The way he stood, the way he did not rush, the way the space around him seemed to settle instead of shift. Silence stretched between them, not empty, but heavy, filled with unspoken calculation, and for the first time, Elena understood something clearly. This was not a confrontation. This was an evaluation. You adjusted the timing, he said finally, his voice even, not accusatory, not impressed, just certain. Elena did not respond immediately. She let the words sit, measuring them, not for meaning, but for intent. Because he was not asking. He was confirming. And confirmation meant he already knew enough. It created a delay. She replied, her tone calm, controlled, matching his pace, not defensive, not revealing more than necessary. A small pause followed, just enough for tension to settle deeper. His gaze did not shift, did not flicker, just remained steady, observing, not her appearance, not her position, but something beneath that, something she could feel but not fully define. That delay should not have been possible, he said. Elena tilted her head slightly, not in challenge, but in quiet acknowledgement. And yet it was. Another silence. Longer this time. Because now, it was not about the system. It was about her. She felt it in the stillness, in the way the air between them held its shape instead of moving. This was where most people would explain, justify, fill the space with words to regain control. Elena did not. She let the silence remain. Because silence, she had learned, could be more precise than any answer. His eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion, but in interest, as if something about her response did not fit the pattern he expected. You were removed this morning, he said, shifting the frame without raising his voice. Most people would not come back. Elena's expression did not change, but something inside her aligned more clearly. This was not about what she had done. It was about why she had done it. Most people are predictable, she said quietly. Not a challenge. A statement. He watched her for a moment longer, and in that moment, Elena felt it again, that subtle pressure, not external, not physical, but internal, the sense that every word, every pause, every breath was being measured, weighed, placed into something larger she could not yet see. And you are not, he asked. The question was simple. The weight behind it was not. Elena held his gaze this time, not avoiding it, not challenging it, just meeting it. Not anymore. The words landed softly, but they stayed, hanging between them, shifting something in the space neither of them acknowledged directly. A faint movement behind him caught her peripheral vision, a reflection in the car window, a subtle repositioning, a reminder that this moment, this conversation, was not isolated. It was observed, controlled, structured, but for the first time, Elena did not feel outside of it. She felt inside it, even if just slightly. He stepped closer, not enough to invade, just enough to reduce the space between them, to test distance, to adjust pressure. You access something you should not have, he said, his voice lower now, not louder, but closer. Elena did not step back. Not this time. Then it should not have been accessible, she replied. Calm, precise, balanced. Another pause. But this one felt different. Not tension building, tension holding, because neither of them moved. Neither of them gave ground. And in that stillness, something became clear. This was not about stopping her. Not yet. This was about understanding her, measuring her, deciding where she fit. Elena's fingers relaxed slightly at her side, her breathing steady, her thoughts no longer racing, just aligning, because she could feel it now. The shift, the moment where she was no longer just a disruption. She was a variable, and variables were not removed immediately. They were studied, used, or contained. Be careful, he said finally, stepping back just enough to restore the distance, but not the balance. The system corrects what it cannot control. Elena watched him for a second longer, her expression unreadable, her mind already processing the layers beneath the words, because this was not a warning. It was a line. and she had already crossed it. Then maybe it is time the system learned something new, she said quietly. He did not respond. Not with words. Just a slight pause, a fraction longer than before, just enough to suggest that something about her answer had registered in a way he did not expect. Then he turned, the moment ending not with resolution, but with suspension, the kind that left everything unfinished, everything open, everything in motion. Elena stood there, watching him return to the car, the door closing with quiet precision, the vehicle pulling away without urgency, without hesitation. And as the street returned to normal around her, as the noise filled back in, as the world resumed its rhythm, one thing remained clear. This was not over. Not even close. Because neither of them had revealed what they truly wanted. And that meant the real game had not even started yet. Elena did not follow the car with her eyes once it disappeared, because she already knew something more important than where it went. She knew it had not come for her by accident. That realization settled slowly, not as a shock, but as a quiet shift in perspective, the kind that changes how everything before it is understood. She remained still for a moment longer, letting the street return to its normal rhythm around her, letting the noise fill in the silence that conversation had left behind. But inside, nothing felt normal anymore. Because what he said, and more importantly, what he did not say, stayed with her. The system corrects what it cannot control. That was not a warning. It was a description. And if that was true, then her removal that morning was not punishment. It was correction. Elena's fingers tightened slightly at her side as that thought settled deeper, her mind replaying the moment again, not emotionally, not as humiliation, but as structure. The timing, the speed, the precision. It had not been chaotic. It had been clean. Too clean. She started walking again, slower this time, her eyes no longer scanning randomly, but aligning details, placing moments into a sequence that now made more sense than before. Daniel's reaction, the guard's positioning, the immediate replacement. None of it had been improvised. And that meant one thing. It had been authorized. Not by Daniel. Not by the guards. By something above them. Elena's breath remained steady, but her thoughts sharpened, narrowing in on one detail she had not fully understood until now. The office. The open file. The name she had seen for just a second before walking out. Ownership records. Layered. Complicated. But not random. She stopped at the edge of another intersection, her reflection catching briefly in a passing window, and this time, she did not look at herself. She looked past it. Because the question was no longer what happened to her. The question was why her. Her phone buzzed again, but she did not rush to check it. Instead, she let it sit for a moment, letting her thoughts finish forming before introducing something new. Because now, she understood that timing was everything. She finally lifted the screen, her eyes scanning the message quickly. You were not the target. Elena froze. Not visibly, not dramatically, but inside, something shifted instantly, sharply, like a line being redrawn without warning. Her eyes moved over the words again, slower this time, making sure she had not misread them. You were not the target. The sentence did not explain anything. It did not clarify. It complicated. Because if she was not the target, then what was she? Her mind moved quickly, connecting the pieces she already had. The maintenance request, the open office, the file, the timing of her removal. And now this. A new possibility formed, one that felt colder than anything before. She had not been removed because of what she was. She had been removed because of where she was. Elena's breathing slowed, her focus narrowing even further as the implications unfolded. That office had not been empty by mistake. That file had not been left open by accident. And her presence there had not gone unnoticed. She closed her eyes briefly, just for a second, letting the thought settle fully, because this changed everything. She had not just been a pawn. She had been a placeholder. A temporary variable in something larger. Something that required her to be there at that exact moment, and then required her to be removed just as precisely. Her eyes opened again, sharper now, more focused than before, because this was no longer about reacting to a system. This was about understanding the purpose behind it. She looked back toward the direction of the building, not directly, but enough to align her thoughts with it. If she had not been the target, then someone else had been. Someone who had access to that office. Someone connected to those files. Someone who needed a moment. A distraction. A shift. Elena's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in realization. Because that meant her humiliation, her removal, her entire mourning, had been part of something else entirely. Not about her. Never about her. And that was the part that changed how everything felt. Because being underestimated was one thing. Being used without even being considered important enough to matter was something else. Her phone remained in her hand, the message still on the screen, but now it felt different. Not like a warning, not like guidance, but like a fragment. A piece of something larger she could not see yet. And if that was true, then whoever was sending these messages knew more than they were saying. Elena lowered the phone slowly, her expression calm, controlled, but her thoughts moving faster now, deeper, because this was no longer a single-layer problem. This was layered, intentional, structured beyond what she had first assumed. And somewhere inside that structure, there was a person who had been important enough to move the entire system for just a few minutes. Just enough time. Just enough distraction. Just enough cover. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, her focus locking onto one question that refused to let go. If she was not the target, then who had walked into that office right after she left? Elena did not respond to the message right away, not because she did not understand it, but because she finally understood the value of delay. Every second she did not answer was a second she controlled. And control, even in small amounts, was something she no longer gave away for free. She slipped her phone back into her pocket and kept walking, her pace steady, her posture relaxed, but her thoughts moving with quiet precision, aligning everything she had learned so far into something more structured, something usable. If she was not the target, then someone else had been. And if the system had moved to protect that moment, then whoever stood at the center of it was not just important. They were protected. That meant power. Real power. But protection created distance. And distance created opportunity. Her steps slowed slightly as she reached the edge of a quieter block, one with fewer people, fewer reflections, fewer variables, and that was when she saw it again. The same black sedan. Parked. Waiting. Not hidden this time. Not subtle. Deliberate. Elena stopped. Not abruptly. Not with hesitation, just enough to acknowledge the shift. Because this was no longer coincidence. This was intent. The door opened slowly, and he stepped out again, the same calm presence, the same controlled movement. But this time, there was no distance to maintain. No observation from afar. This was direct. Elena felt it immediately, the tension settling into place before a single word was spoken, the kind of tension that did not come from fear, but from awareness. Because now, both of them knew something the other did not fully say. She had information. And he knew it. You read the routing, he said, his voice even, as if confirming something already decided. Elena did not deny it. Denial had no value here. It was not meant to be found, she replied calmly. A pause followed, short but heavy, as if the air itself adjusted to the shift in direction. He studied her, not with curiosity, not with judgment, but with calculation, the kind that measured outcomes before actions. And yet you found it, he said. Elena held his gaze, steady, controlled, no longer avoiding, no longer deflecting. You left it open. The words landed softly, but they changed the balance, just slightly, just enough to matter. Another silence. Longer this time. Because now, the conversation had moved past surface. Into intention. His expression did not change, but something in the stillness shifted. Something subtle, something that told her she had touched something real. You are assuming a lot, he said. Elena tilted her head slightly, not in challenge, but in clarity. No, she said quietly. I am observing. That word lingered between them, sharper than any accusation, because observation meant awareness, and awareness meant she was no longer outside the system. She was inside it, even if just barely. He stepped closer, not aggressively, not to dominate, but to reduce the distance, to test the space where control shifted from one person to another. Then observe this, he said, his voice lower now, not louder, but more focused. You were not removed to eliminate you. You were removed to protect something else. Elena did not react outwardly, but inside, the confirmation settled immediately, aligning perfectly with what she had already begun to suspect. She did not ask what. She did not ask who. Because questions revealed position. And she was done revealing hers. Then you needed me there, she said instead, her tone steady, controlled, turning the frame slightly. just enough to shift the pressure back. Another pause. And this one was different. Not tension, recognition. Because now, they were no longer circling the truth. They were standing near it. For a moment, he said. Elena nodded once, slowly, as if accepting something unspoken. Because now, the situation was clearer than before. She had been used. But not randomly. Not carelessly. Strategically. And that meant something important. If she had been useful once, she could be useful again. But this time on her terms. Her eyes held his, not challenging, not yielding, just present. Then we both know something we are not saying, she said quietly. A faint shift in his posture followed. Almost unnoticeable, but enough. Enough to confirm that she had moved the conversation into a different space. A more dangerous one. Careful, he said, not as a warning, but as a boundary. Assumptions can be expensive. Elena's lips pressed together slightly, not in hesitation, but in control. So can silence. The words landed, precise, measured, and for a second, the balance held, perfectly even, neither side moving, neither side revealing more than necessary. Because this was not trust. Not even close. This was alignment. Temporary. Conditional. Built on mutual awareness rather than agreement. He studied her for a moment longer, then stepped back slightly, just enough to reset the distance without breaking the connection. If you keep moving the way you are, he said, you will need access you do not have. Elena did not respond immediately. She let the words settle, not as an offer, not as a threat, but as something in between. A possibility. Or a trap. She exhaled slowly, her mind already working through the implications, the risks, the angles. Because this was the first real shift. Not control, not power, but access through someone who understood the system from within. And that kind of access always came with a cost. And if I do not? She asked finally, her voice calm, neutral, but intentional. A small pause followed. Then the system will correct you again. Elena nodded slightly, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable, because she understood now. This was not an invitation. It was a test. One that could open doors or close them permanently. She turned slightly, not walking away, not stepping forward, just shifting her position enough to break the symmetry, to reclaim a fraction of control in a moment that had been carefully balanced from the start. Then I will decide which risk is worth taking, she said quietly. He did not stop her. He did not respond. He just watched, the same controlled stillness, the same measured silence, as she stepped back into the flow of the street once more. And as Elena moved away, her thoughts already calculating, already aligning the next step, one thing remained clear. This was not a partnership, not trust, not safety. This was leverage. Temporary, fragile, and at any moment, it could turn against her. Elena kept walking, but the rhythm was gone. Not outside, not in the city, but inside her. Something had shifted after that conversation, something deeper than strategy, deeper than calculation, something that did not fit neatly into patterns or systems. She had felt it the moment he stepped closer, not as fear, not as pressure, but as something unfamiliar, something she had not accounted for. Recognition, not of who he was, but of what he represented. Not just power, not just control, but clarity. And that was dangerous. Her steps slowed slightly as she turned onto another street, quieter now, less crowded, the kind of space where thoughts did not have to compete with noise. Because now, for the first time since this began, the conflict was not outside. It was inside her. Her mind replayed every word he said, every pause, every shift in tone, not looking for meaning anymore, but for intention. He did not lie. That was the first thing she realized. He withheld. He redirected. But he did not lie. And that alone made him different from the rest of the system she had seen so far. Daniel had hidden behind authority. The guards had followed orders without question. The system itself moved in silence. But him, he had given her just enough truth to change her position, without ever giving her enough to control it. And that was where the tension lived. Because a part of her, a small, quiet part she did not want to acknowledge, understood what that meant. It meant he was not trying to eliminate her. Not yet. It meant he saw value, potential, and that thought, that possibility, pulled at something she had been pushing down since the beginning. Trust. Not fully formed. Not safe. But present. She exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against her arm as she walked, grounding herself, because she could feel the shift happening, subtle but real. The part of her that had been humiliated, pushed out, treated as invisible, wanted to believe that someone inside that system saw her differently, that someone had not dismissed her completely. And for a second, just a second, that thought felt like relief, like a way out, like something she could hold on to. But then another thought followed immediately, sharper, colder, cutting through the first before it could settle. If he sees value in you, then you are still being used. Elena stopped walking. Not abruptly, just enough to break the rhythm, to hold that thought in place before it slipped away. Because this was the choice. Not between right and wrong. Not between safe and dangerous. But between two kinds of risk. Trust him, and risk becoming part of his system. Reject him, and face the system alone. Her chest tightened slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of that decision, because for the first time, she could see both paths clearly, and neither one was clean. Her eyes lifted slowly, catching her reflection in a dark window again, and this time, she looked at it differently. Not as who she was, but as who she was becoming. Because the truth was simple. She could not go back. Not to being invisible. Not to being passive. Not to being someone who reacted instead of decided. That version of her was gone the moment she stepped back into that building. The moment she made the call. The moment she chose to see instead of ignore. Her hand moved, slowly, deliberately, pulling her phone back out, the screen lighting up again, the messages still there, the warnings, the fragments, the pieces of a system that had already tried to contain her. She stared at them for a moment, not emotionally, not reactively, just clearly. Because now, she understood something she had not understood before. Every message, every warning, every interaction. It was not guidance. It was influence. Designed to shape her decisions without her realizing it. Designed to keep her within a certain path. A controlled path. And that meant one thing. Even the help she received was part of the system. Her grip tightened slightly around the phone, not in frustration, but in clarity. Because now, the illusion was gone. There was no safe side. No ally she could rely on without cost. No connection that did not come with control attached to it. Not him. Not the messages. Not anyone inside that structure. Elena exhaled slowly, her shoulders straightening just slightly, not visibly, but enough for her to feel the shift inside. Because the choice was no longer complicated. It was simple. She would not trust him. Not because he was the enemy, but because trust itself was a vulnerability she could not afford. Not here. Not now. She lifted her eyes again, her expression calm, her thoughts steady, her direction clear. Because if she was going to move forward, it would not be by following. It would not be by aligning. It would be by controlling. Even if that meant standing alone. Even if that meant facing the system without protection. Her thumb moved across the screen, deleting the message thread entirely, not out of anger, not out of impulse, but as a decision. Clean. Final. Intentional. No more external signals. No more guided moves. Just her. And the system. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and started walking again, her pace steady, her posture relaxed. But something about her had changed in a way that could not be undone. Because this time, she was not looking for connection. She was choosing control. And that choice was the moment she stopped being a piece in someone else's game and started becoming something far more dangerous. Elena did not look back again. Not at the building, not at the street where everything had started, because the moment she chose control, the past lost its value. What mattered now was structure. And structure required distance. She moved through the city with quiet precision, not fast, not slow, just measured, her mind already layering information into something far more complex than reaction. Because this was no longer about responding to the system. This was about designing something inside it. Her steps carried her into a small public library, a place no one associated with power, no one watched closely, and that was exactly why she chose it. She sat near the back, not hidden, just unremarkable, her phone resting on the table as she began to build something invisible. The first layer was information. Not the kind she had been given, not the fragments or warnings, but controlled input. She reopened the routing file she had received earlier, studying it again, not for what it showed, but for what it implied. Unlisted channels. Internal bypasses. That meant there were communications that never entered the official system. Conversations that existed outside tracking. And if those channels existed, They could be imitated. Carefully, Elena's fingers moved across the screen, not rushing, not hesitating, constructing a new request, not identical to the one before, but aligned with its pattern, adjusted just enough to appear legitimate within the blind spot. But this time, she did not send it. Not yet. Because information alone was not enough. The second layer was people. Not allies. Not trusted connections. Variables. She opened her contact list again, scanning names with a different lens now, not looking for familiarity, but for positioning. Who had access without authority? Who moved information without owning it? Who could be influenced without realizing it? Her eyes paused on two names. One from operations. One from external maintenance. Neither powerful. Both connected to flow. Perfect. She sent two messages, simple, neutral, unrelated on the surface, but timed. Precise. One to create a question, the other to create a delay. Then she waited. Because timing was the third layer. Not when something happened, but how events overlapped. Inside the system, everything moved in sequence. Predictable. Controlled. But when two sequences collided, the system hesitated. And hesitation was where control could shift. Her phone buzzed softly. The first response. Confusion. Good. The second came seconds later. A confirmation. Better. Elena's expression did not change, but her focus sharpened, because now the pieces were moving. Not randomly. Not independently. But within a structure she had set. She opened the unsent request again, her eyes scanning it one last time, adjusting a single detail, a timestamp, a routing reference, something small enough to go unnoticed, but significant enough to redirect attention. Then she sent it. No hesitation. No pause. Because now, the trap was active. The first layer would trigger internal verification. The second would create conflicting inputs. And the third would force a decision point inside the system where none was expected. Elena leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed, her breathing steady, but her mind fully engaged, tracking invisible movement she could not see directly, only infer. Somewhere inside that building, someone would receive a signal that did not match. Someone would question it. Someone would act. And in that moment, the system would reveal itself. Not completely, but enough. Her phone remained still. For a few seconds. Then it buzzed again. A new alert. Not a message. Not a warning. A system notification. Access request escalated. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, not in surprise, but in confirmation. It was working. The escalation meant her input had reached a layer above standard control. Exactly where she needed it to go. But escalation also meant attention. And attention meant risk. She closed the file slowly, her fingers resting lightly on the edge of the phone, her thoughts already moving ahead, because this was only the beginning. The trap was not meant to catch immediately. It was meant to pull, to stretch the system just enough to expose its structure. Her gaze lifted slightly, not toward anything specific, just forward, focused, because she understood something clearly now. She was no longer reacting to their moves. They were reacting to hers. But the most dangerous part was not the reaction. It was the delay before it. Because that delay meant they had not yet seen the full pattern. And by the time they did, it would already be too late. Elena remained still, her expression calm, her posture neutral, blending into the quiet space around her, while somewhere else, far from where she sat, the first layer of her plan had already begun to unfold, unnoticed, misinterpreted, and slowly, almost silently, building toward a point no one else was prepared for, like a clock that had already started ticking down without anyone realizing time was running out. The first sign was not loud. It was not obvious. It was a delay that lasted just a fraction too long. Elena felt it before she understood it, the subtle shift in rhythm, the kind that only existed when something inside a system hesitated in the wrong place. Her eyes remained on her phone, but her attention moved elsewhere, tracing the invisible lines she had set in motion. The escalation had triggered. The inputs had collided. The pressure point had formed exactly where she expected. But then, something did not follow. Her screen flickered slightly as a second notification appeared, layered over the first. Not a confirmation. Not a rejection. A reroute. Elena's fingers stilled for a brief second, her breath tightening just enough to register the change. Because reroute meant interference. Not from her. From somewhere else. She leaned forward slightly, her posture still relaxed to anyone watching, but her focus sharpening instantly, her mind recalculating faster now, adjusting variables, isolating the anomaly. The system should have escalated upward in a clean line. Instead, it had shifted sideways. That was not standard behavior. That was intervention. Her phone buzzed again, faster this time. Another alert. Internal override detected. Elena's jaw tightened slightly, not in panic, but in recognition. Someone had stepped in, not reacting to the system, anticipating it. Her eyes moved quickly across the screen, scanning the routing trail, tracing the path her request had taken, and for the first time, the pattern broke in a way she had not designed. The channel she accessed had been accessed again. Not by her. Not by her variables. By someone else. And that meant one thing. She was not the only one using the blind spot. Her pulse remained steady, but her thoughts accelerated, pushing past the structure she had built, searching for the point where control had slipped. Because this was not random disruption. This was precision. The same kind she had just used. But faster. Cleaner. More experienced. Her phone buzzed again. A message this time. Not from the unknown number. Not from any contact she recognized. Just a single line, appearing without context. You are not the only one watching. Elena froze for half a second, her grip tightening around the phone, her breath catching just slightly, because this was not part of her plan. This was not part of any pattern she had mapped. This was something else. Something outside her structure. Her eyes lifted slowly, scanning the room, not looking for a face, not searching for movement, but feeling for presence, the same way she had learned to detect shifts inside the system. But everything looked normal. People reading, typing, moving quietly through their routines. Nothing out of place. And that was exactly what made it worse. She looked back down at her screen, her mind moving faster now, abandoning the original structure, shifting into adaptation, because the trap she had built was no longer isolated. It had been entered, touched, altered. The second layer she had created, the people, the variables, they were no longer reacting the way she expected. One of the contacts responded again, but this time, the tone was different. Not confused. Controlled. Too controlled. The delay she had created was no longer causing hesitation. It was being absorbed. Neutralized. Her fingers moved quickly, pulling up the routing file again, tracing the path once more, but the trail no longer led cleanly upward. It branched, split, redirected into a secondary channel she had not seen before. Her breath slowed, but her chest tightened slightly, because this was the first time she had encountered something she could not immediately map. And that meant one thing. There was another layer. One she had not accounted for. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her focus locking onto the new path, trying to understand its structure, its logic, its purpose. But the more she looked, the clearer it became. This was not part of the system she had been studying. This was above it. Or beside it. Something that moved independently. Her phone buzzed again. Another message. Same unknown source. You moved too fast. Elena exhaled slowly, her posture still controlled, but inside, the realization settled in with sharp clarity. This was not a system reacting to her. This was a system reacting to something else that she had just stepped into. Her trap was still active, but it was no longer hers alone. And that changed everything. Because now, she was not controlling the outcome. She was part of it. Her fingers hovered over the screen, not typing, not responding, just still, as her mind worked through the implications, the risks, the unknown variables that had just entered the equation. Because for the first time since she started this, she could not predict the next move. Not theirs. Not her own. And that was the moment she understood something she had not considered before. She had not just triggered the system. She had triggered something inside it that was already moving. And now, everything was no longer following her plan. Elena did not move right away, but this time, the stillness was different. It was not uncertainty. It was recalibration. Her eyes remained on the screen, tracing the broken pattern again, not trying to force it back into what she expected, but letting it reveal what it actually was. Because that was the mistake she almost made. Assuming control meant prediction. It did not. Control meant adaptation. And now, the system had shown her something new. It was not just layered. It was contested. Multiple forces moving through the same structure, using the same blind spots, but for different reasons. Her trap had not failed. It had collided. and collisions created exposure. Elena exhaled slowly, her fingers relaxing around the phone, her mind shifting from disruption to opportunity, because if someone else was using the same channel, then that channel was not just a weakness. It was a battlefield, and battlefields left traces. She leaned forward slightly, her posture still composed, her movements minimal, but her attention fully sharpened as she reopened the rerouted path, not following where it went, but how it moved. The timing was different, faster than hers, more efficient, less hesitation. That told her something important. Whoever stepped in had used this before. Not once, not recently, repeatedly. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, her focus tightening as she isolated the divergence point, the exact moment her input had been intercepted and redirected. It was clean, almost invisible, but not perfect. Nothing ever was. A fractional delay, less than a second, but enough. Enough to measure, enough to compare. Her fingers moved quickly now, pulling up the earlier routing logs, the maintenance records, the authorization anomalies she had collected, overlaying them mentally, aligning patterns, not by sequence, but by behavior. And then she saw it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to recognize. The same delay, the same micro-shift, appearing in multiple places. Not random, not isolated. A signature. Elena's breathing slowed, deeper now, more controlled, because this was no longer about reacting to interference. This was identification. Someone else inside the system was moving with precision, and they were leaving a pattern. A small one, but consistent. Her phone buzzed again, but she ignored it this time. Messages were noise now. The pattern was signal. She focused on the divergence point again, tracing it backward instead of forward, not following where it led, but where it came from. The reroute had not originated from the highest layer. That was the illusion. It had come from a midpoint, a position that could access both lower and higher channels without being visible at either level. Elena's lips pressed together slightly, not in tension, but in recognition. That position was not authority. It was control without visibility. The most dangerous kind. Her fingers moved again, opening the internal directory she had accessed earlier, scanning roles, not by title, but by function, filtering out anything obvious, anything public, narrowing down to positions that fit the pattern she had just identified. 3 possibilities. Then 2. Then 1. She stopped. Not because she was unsure, but because she understood what she was looking at. The name itself did not matter. The role did. Internal routing supervisor. A position designed to move information without being seen, to adjust flow without being questioned. Exactly the kind of role that could intercept her trap without triggering alarms. Elena leaned back slightly, her posture relaxing again, but her eyes sharper now, her thoughts clearer, because this changed everything. She was not dealing with a single system. She was dealing with layers of control operating within it. And that meant something critical. They were not unified. They were competing. And competition created leverage. Her hand moved slowly, reopening the unsent draft she had abandoned earlier, her eyes scanning it quickly, then adjusting it, not to trigger the system again, but to target the pattern she had just found. Not a broad disruption, a precise one, a signal designed to look like a mistake, but placed exactly where that unseen operator would have to respond. She did not send it immediately. She waited, just a few seconds, letting the system settle, letting the previous disruption fade just enough to lower awareness. Then she pressed send. This time, she did not watch the system. She watched the timing. 1 second, 2, 3, and then, the delay appeared. Exactly where she expected it. Elena's expression did not change, but inside, the shift was immediate, solid, undeniable. Because now, she was no longer reacting to an unknown force. She had found its edge, and edges could be controlled. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, she smiled. Not visibly, just slightly. Because for the first time since the system pushed back, she had something real. Not access, not position, but something far more valuable. She had identified another player inside the system. And that meant she was no longer alone in the game. Elena did not rush the next move, because this time, it was not about testing the system, it was about taking something from it. Her eyes remained on the screen, tracking the delay she had forced, the signature she had isolated, the invisible operator who had stepped into her trap without realizing it. That was the difference now. Before, She had been reacting to movement. Now, she was creating it. And more importantly, she knew where it would go. Her fingers moved slowly, deliberately, reopening the routing layer she had just exposed. But this time, she did not follow it. She placed something inside it. A signal, not large enough to trigger alarms, not obvious enough to be traced immediately, but precise, designed to sit exactly where that hidden operator would have to interact with it. She did not send a request. She did not create disruption. She inserted control. Then she waited. Because real power was not in action. It was in timing. Seconds passed. Then the first reaction came. A micro delay. Smaller than before. More careful. Whoever was on the other side had noticed something. But they had not understood it yet. Good. That meant the signal had landed. Elena's breathing remained steady, her posture unchanged, but her mind sharpened further, because now she was not just watching the system. She was watching the person inside it. The second reaction followed. Not a delay. A correction. The routing adjusted slightly, bypassing the point she had touched, but not completely. Not cleanly. That was the mistake. Because in trying to avoid her signal, they had revealed their path more clearly. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, her focus locking onto the new route, mapping it instantly, understanding not just where it went, but how it moved. This was no longer a blind spot. This was a corridor, and she was standing inside it. Her phone buzzed again, but this time, it was not a warning. It was a system notification. Access temporarily granted. Elena did not react outwardly, but inside, everything aligned at once. Because this was it. Not influence. Not adaptation. Control. Real control. For the first time since this began, the system had not just responded to her. It had adjusted to include her, even if only for a moment. Even if only because it had no other choice. Her fingers moved immediately, not hesitating, not questioning, because she understood the window was temporary. She accessed the corridor directly, not broadly, not recklessly, but precisely, pulling only what she needed. Routing histories. Authorization overlaps. Hidden sequences that revealed how information actually moved beneath the surface. And as she read, the structure unfolded in front of her, clearer than ever before. Not one system. Not one authority. Multiple layers. Multiple operators. Each controlling different flows. Each unaware of the full picture. And right at the center of that structure, the moment she had been placed. Her breath slowed, deeper now, as the realization settled in with undeniable clarity. She had not just found a weakness. She had found the point where the system intersected with itself. And that point was unstable. Her fingers moved again, closing the access before it could be revoked, before the window closed, before the system corrected itself again. She did not take everything. She did not need to. Because what she had now was not data. It was understanding. And understanding was power. She leaned back slightly, her posture relaxed, her expression calm. But something about her had shifted again, something deeper, something irreversible. Because now, she was no longer outside the system. She was no longer reacting to it. She was inside its structure, moving with it, controlling parts of it. And that changed everything. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message. Not from the unknown number. Not from any contact she recognized. Just a short line. What did you just do? Elena looked at it for a second, her expression unreadable, but her thoughts already moving ahead, already calculating the next step, because that message told her something important. The system had felt the shift. And more importantly, someone inside it had felt it too. She lifted her eyes slowly, her gaze drifting toward the window beside her, catching the reflection of the street, the movement, the normal rhythm of everything outside. But this time, it looked different. Because she was no longer part of that flow. She was above it. Not in status. Not in position. But in awareness. And awareness was what separated those who followed from those who controlled. Somewhere, inside that building, inside that layered structure she had just touched, people were starting to notice. Not clearly. Not completely. But enough to feel the disruption. Enough to sense that something had changed. Daniel would feel it first. Not as knowledge. As pressure. The guards would notice it next. Not as information. As hesitation. And him. The man who had stood in front of her with quiet control. He would understand it. Not immediately. But soon. Elena's fingers relaxed slightly at her side. Her breathing steady. Her posture calm. Because this time, She was not waiting to be seen. She was waiting to be recognized. And when that happened, everything would shift. Her phone buzzed one last time, another message appearing, but she did not look at it immediately. She already knew what it meant. Because the reaction had begun. And somewhere inside that system, people were no longer asking what happened. They were asking who caused it. And for the first time, the answer was her. Elena did not need to look at the message to understand what was happening, because she could feel it in the shift of the system itself. In the way the rhythm she had studied so carefully began to break in places it was never supposed to. It was subtle at first, almost invisible, but now that she had seen the structure from the inside, she could recognize it immediately. Control was slipping. Not completely. Not yet. But enough to matter. Her fingers rested lightly against the phone as she finally glanced down, reading the message that had come through moments ago. Where are you? No name. No number. But she knew exactly who it was. And that alone was enough to confirm what she had already begun to realize. He was no longer observing from a distance. He was reacting. Elena exhaled slowly, her posture still composed, her expression calm. But something inside her shifted again, something sharper this time, something that felt almost like clarity settling into place. Because this was the first real sign. Not from the system. From him. The man who had stood in front of her without hesitation, without uncertainty, without any visible loss of control, was now reaching out without structure, without distance, without certainty. And that meant something had changed. She did not answer immediately. She let the silence stretch, not as a tactic this time, but as a test. Because now, she needed to see how far the shift had gone. Seconds passed. Then her phone buzzed again. Another message. Shorter. Tighter. We need to talk. Elena's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in recognition. The tone had changed. The precision was still there, but something else had slipped through it. Urgency. Not loud. Not obvious. But present. And that was something she had not seen before. She lifted her gaze slowly, looking toward the window again, her reflection faint against the movement outside, and for the first time, she allowed herself to acknowledge it fully. The balance had moved. Not completely, not safely, but undeniably. She stood up, her movements smooth, controlled, her pace unhurried as she stepped out of the library and back into the street. The air felt different now, not because anything had changed around her, but because she had. The city moved the same way. The building stood the same way. The system continued its quiet operations beneath the surface. But her position inside it was no longer the same. Her phone buzzed again as she walked, but she did not look at it this time. She already knew what it would say. More questions. More attempts to re-establish control. And that told her everything she needed to know. Because before, he had never asked. He had stated. Confirmed. Directed. Now he was trying to reach. Elena turned the corner slowly, her eyes scanning the street ahead, and there it was. The black sedan. Not parked this time. Idling. Waiting. But something about it felt different. Not the car. Not the position. The energy around it. Less controlled. Less certain. She approached without hesitation, her steps steady, her posture relaxed, but her awareness fully engaged, because this moment, this interaction, would define what came next. The door opened before she reached it, but not as smoothly as before. A fraction too fast. A fraction too reactive. He stepped out, his expression composed, his posture still precise, but Elena saw it immediately. The difference. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. His eyes. Not as still as before. Not as detached. Focused, yes, but now searching. Measuring in real time instead of already knowing. You access something you should not have, he said, his voice controlled, but the rhythm was different. Less even. Less certain. Elena stopped in front of him, her gaze steady, her expression unreadable, but inside, everything aligned with quiet certainty. Because this was no longer a confrontation. This was confirmation. And you felt it, she replied calmly. Not a question. A statement. A mirror. A pause followed, but this time, it was not neutral. It was charged. Because her words had landed exactly where they were meant to. His jaw tightened slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice, but Elena saw it. Registered it. Understood it. You disrupted a controlled layer, he said, his tone sharpening just slightly, just enough to reveal what he was trying to contain. You do not understand the consequences. Elena tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering, her voice calm, almost soft. No, she said, you did not expect me to. Another pause. But this one was different. He did not respond immediately. And that was the shift. Because before, he always had the next move ready. The next line. The next control point. Now he was processing, adjusting, reacting. And for the first time, Elena felt it clearly, not as a thought, not as a possibility, but as something real. He was no longer fully in control of this. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed, but her presence had changed. It was no longer reactive, no longer testing. It was anchored, grounded in something stronger than uncertainty. Because now, she was not trying to understand the system. She was affecting it. And he was feeling that effect. You are stepping into something you cannot contain, he said finally, his voice lower now, not louder, but carrying something else beneath it. Not just warning, not just control, something closer to frustration. Elena held his gaze for a moment longer, her expression calm, her thoughts clear, her position solid. Then maybe it is not meant to be contained, she replied quietly. The words settled between them, and for the first time since they had met, the silence that followed did not belong to him. It belonged to her. He did not move, did not speak, just stood there, his control still present, but no longer absolute, no longer untouched. And in that moment, Elena saw it. Not weakness, not defeat, but something far more important. A crack. Small, controlled, but real. And for the first time, he did not know exactly what to do next. Elena did not look away when the silence stretched between them, because now, she understood that silence was no longer his weapon, it was hers. She watched him carefully, not for what he said, but for what he could no longer hide, and for the first time, the system around him began to make sense in a way it never had before. Not as a structure, not as layers, but as intention. You said I was not the target, she said quietly, her voice steady, controlled, but carrying something deeper now, something heavier. So who was? He did not answer immediately. That was the first confirmation. Before, he would have redirected, controlled the frame. Now he paused. And that pause told her everything. Elena stepped slightly closer. Not aggressively, not emotionally, but with purpose, closing the distance just enough to shift the balance further. It was the office, she continued, her eyes locked on his, her thoughts aligning faster now, sharper, clearer. The file was not left open by accident. The routing anomaly was not a mistake. And my removal, her voice lowered slightly, not breaking, but tightening with realization, was timed. His jaw moved subtly, a small reaction, almost invisible, but Elena caught it, felt it, understood it. And in that moment, the final piece fell into place. You needed a window, she said, the words no longer a guess, no longer a theory, but a conclusion. A few minutes where the system shifted focus, where no one questioned movement, where access could happen without being seen. Her breath deepened, her chest rising slightly as everything connected at once, every detail, every moment. Every humiliation she had replayed over and over again in her mind. And I was the distraction. The words landed heavier than anything before, not because they were loud, but because they were true, complete, undeniable. He did not interrupt her. He did not correct her. And that silence was the final confirmation. Elena felt something rise inside her, not sudden, not explosive, but deep, controlled. Something that had been building from the moment her cart hit that marble floor, from the moment she was told she did not belong, from the moment no one stepped forward. It was not just anger. It was clarity. You let it happen, she said, her voice steady, but now carrying weight, real weight. You saw it. You knew exactly what was going on. And you did nothing. For the first time, his expression shifted in a way she had not seen before. Not loss of control, not fully, but something closer to impact, something that reached past calculation into something more human. It was necessary, he said finally, his voice lower, more deliberate, but no longer untouched. Elena let out a quiet breath, but it was not relief. It was release. Because that was it. That was the truth. Not complicated. Not hidden. Simple. Cold. Necessary, she repeated softly, the words sitting in her mouth like something foreign, something sharp. For who? He did not answer. And this time, she did not need him to. Because she already knew. The file. The routing. The hidden channel. Someone important enough to move the entire system for just a few minutes. Someone protected. Someone whose access mattered more than her dignity, more than her position, more than her existence in that space. Her eyes hardened slightly, not with emotion, but with understanding, because now, everything that had felt personal was not. It was calculated, structured, designed. She had not been humiliated because she was weak. She had been humiliated because it was efficient. And that realization changed everything. The pain that had once felt sharp, unpredictable, overwhelming settled into something else. Something focused, directed, justified. Elena straightened slightly, her posture shifting, not visibly to anyone else, but enough for him to feel it, because the dynamic between them had changed again. Not just in power, in purpose. You did not just use me, she said quietly. You erased me when you were done. The words were calm, controlled, but they carried more weight than anything she had said before. Because now, she was not speaking from confusion. She was speaking from truth. He watched her closely, his gaze steady, but something behind it had shifted, something he could not fully contain anymore. Because this was no longer a situation he had predicted. This was something else. Something he had not accounted for. Elena held his gaze, her breathing even, her thoughts clear, her position solid. Because now, there was no more doubt, no more missing pieces, no more questions about what had happened or why. It was all there, laid out, connected, complete. And with that clarity came something else. Not hesitation, not fear, but certainty. Because now, what she was about to do was not reaction. It was not revenge. It was correction. A balance that had been broken, now understood, now ready to be restored. She stepped back slightly, not retreating, not yielding, but creating space, her eyes never leaving his, her presence no longer uncertain, no longer searching. You were right about one thing, she said softly. The system corrects what it cannot control. A small pause followed, just long enough for the words to settle, for the meaning to shift. Then her voice lowered slightly, not louder, but sharper. And now it is my turn. He did not respond. Not immediately. Not completely. Because for the first time since this began, the outcome was no longer something he could contain. And Elena was no longer someone he could use. Elena did not say anything else after that, because there was nothing left to explain, nothing left to prove, and most importantly, nothing left to ask. The truth had already done its work. It had stripped everything down to its core, leaving only decisions. And she had already made hers. She turned away from him without waiting for permission, without checking his reaction, because that was no longer where her focus belonged. The system was no longer something she needed to understand. It was something she was about to confront. Her steps were steady as she moved down the street, the noise of the city rising around her again, but now it felt distant, irrelevant, like background to something far more precise unfolding beneath it. Her phone vibrated in her hand, once, then again, but this time she did not rush to check it. She already knew what it meant. Movement. The kind she had been waiting for. When she finally looked, the screen confirmed it. Internal alerts. Not public. Not visible to most. But she had access now. Enough to see the shift. Meetings being called. Channels tightening. Routing patterns changing faster than before. The system was not stable anymore. It was preparing. And that meant one thing. They knew something had changed. Elena slowed slightly as she reached the corner across from the building, her eyes lifting to study it again, not as an outsider this time, but as someone who understood what moved inside those walls. The glass reflected the sky the same way. The entrance remained guarded, calm, controlled. But she could see past that now. She could feel the tension beneath it, the way decisions were being made faster, the way control was being reinforced in places that had never needed it before. That was the sign. Not panic. Not chaos. Pressure. The kind that built quietly before something broke. Her fingers moved across the screen again, opening the files she had pulled, reviewing them one last time, not because she doubted them, but because she was preparing to use them. Every layer she had uncovered. Every hidden route. Every inconsistency in authority. They were no longer pieces of information. They were leverage. And for the first time, she was not thinking about how to survive inside the system. She was thinking about how to force it to respond on her terms. Her breathing remained slow, controlled, her posture relaxed, but inside, everything was aligning with a clarity that left no space for hesitation. Because this was no longer about exposing the truth. It was about making it impossible to ignore. A car passed behind her, the sound barely registering as she stepped closer to the edge of the street, her eyes fixed on the building, her mind already moving ahead of the moment. Timing. That was what mattered now. Not just when she acted, but when they could no longer stop it. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, she looked immediately. A new notification. Access restriction update. The window she had used before, closing. Slowly, layer by layer. She watched it happen in real time, the permissions tightening, the channels narrowing, the blind spots shrinking. They were sealing the system, locking it down. Elena's lips pressed together slightly, not in frustration, but in recognition. This was expected, necessary. It meant they were preparing for impact, which meant they had already felt the threat. Good, because that meant she was right where she needed to be. She stepped back from the curb, turning slightly, her gaze shifting away from the building for just a moment as she moved into a quieter space along the sidewalk. Not retreating, positioning. Her fingers moved again, opening a final sequence, one she had not touched yet, one she had been holding back until now. Not because she could not use it, but because once she did, there would be no way to reverse it. Her thumb hovered over the screen for a second, just 1 second, not in doubt, but in acknowledgement. This was the line, the point where everything shifted from controlled escalation to irreversible consequence. She exhaled slowly, her eyes steady, her thoughts clear, because now, there was no more room for hesitation. No more space for uncertainty. She pressed send. The action itself was simple, silent, invisible to anyone standing around her. But inside the system, the effect was immediate. Her phone lit up with alerts, faster now, sharper, more urgent. Channels opening where they had just been closed. Conflicts triggering across multiple layers. Not chaos. Not yet. But instability. Real instability. Elena lowered her hand slowly, her posture still calm, her expression unchanged, but her presence undeniable now. Because this was no longer preparation. This was initiation. And somewhere, inside that building, decisions were no longer being made with certainty. They were being made under pressure. She turned her head slightly, her gaze drifting back toward the entrance, her eyes focused, her breathing steady, because she could feel it now. The shift she had been building toward. The moment where control no longer belonged entirely to them. Her phone buzzed again, a final notification appearing on the screen. Emergency internal review initiated. Elena stared at it for a second, not reacting outwardly, but inside, everything locked into place. Because that was it. The signal she had been waiting for. The system was no longer containing the situation. It was responding to it. And that meant the next phase had already begun. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her shoulders settling, her steps moving forward again, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady, deliberate, because now, there was no more distance between her and what was coming. No more delay, no more separation, only convergence. And as she approached the building once more, the quiet tension in the air tightening with every step, it became clear that whatever happened next would not stay contained for long. The countdown had already started. Elena stepped through the glass doors without slowing down, and this time, no one stopped her. That alone said everything. The receptionist looked up, her expression tightening for a fraction of a second before she forced it back into place, her fingers hovering above the desk as if unsure whether to act or stay still. Elena did not look at her. She did not need to. The hesitation was already noted, already understood. It spread. Subtle, quiet, but present. She moved forward, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, the same floor where everything had begun, but now the sound carried differently, sharper, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Eyes followed her. Not openly, not directly, but she felt it. The shift in attention, the awareness moving through the room like a signal that no one wanted to acknowledge out loud. The elevator doors opened before she reached them. No button pressed. No request made. Just access. Elena stepped inside without pause, her posture relaxed, her expression calm, but her presence anchored. The doors closed, and for a moment, there was silence. Not empty. Controlled. The kind that built pressure instead of releasing it. When the doors opened again, He was already there, waiting, exactly where she expected him to be. But this time, he was not positioned above her. Not physically, not psychologically. He stood near the center of the room, his posture straight, his presence still strong, but there was something different now. Not visible at first glance. But Elena saw it immediately. The stillness was no longer absolute. It was maintained. And that difference mattered. "You should not be here," he said, his voice even, but the words landed differently now. Less like a command, more like a test. Elena stepped forward slowly, her gaze steady, her movements measured, every step intentional. "That stopped being true the moment your system let me in," she replied calmly. A pause followed. Not long, but long enough to register. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in recalculation. "You are forcing instability," he said, his tone controlled, but sharper now, more direct. "You do not understand what that creates." Elena tilted her head slightly, her expression almost thoughtful, but her eyes did not soften. "I understand exactly what it creates," she said quietly. "It creates visibility." The word lingered between them, heavy, deliberate. He did not respond immediately, and that silence was no longer his advantage. Elena took another step forward, closing the distance just enough to shift the dynamic further, not aggressively, but with precision. "You built a system where everything important happens out of sight," she continued, her voice steady, controlled, but carrying weight. "Where decisions are made without consequence, and people like me disappear without explanation." Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering now, because this was no longer about uncovering truth. It was about defining it. "I am not creating instability," she added softly. "I am exposing it." His jaw tightened slightly, a small reaction, but enough. Enough to confirm that her words had landed exactly where they needed to. "Exposure is not control," he said, his voice lower now, more deliberate, but there was something else beneath it. Pressure. Elena did not look away. "No," she agreed calmly. "But it takes control away from you." Another pause. Longer this time. The room itself seemed to hold it, the air tightening, the distance between them charged with something neither of them could ignore. Because this was no longer about position. It was about influence. And that influence was shifting. He took a step forward, closing the gap slightly, not enough to dominate, but enough to reassert presence. "You are assuming this system depends on you being invisible," he said, his voice controlled again. But now there was effort behind it, subtle, but real. "It does not." Elena's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something sharper, something more certain. "No," she said softly. "It depends on people believing it works." The words settled, and this time, there was no immediate response. No redirection. No control point offered in return. Just silence. And in that silence, Elena felt it clearly, not as a guess, not as a possibility, but as something real. He was adjusting, not leading, not controlling, adjusting. Her breathing remained steady, her posture relaxed, but her presence had changed again. It was no longer reactive, no longer proving. It was defining the space between them. "You said it was necessary," she continued, her voice quieter now, but sharper, more precise. "That what happened to me was part of something bigger." She paused, just long enough to let the memory surface, not as pain, but as clarity. "So let me ask you something," she added, her eyes never leaving his. "What happens when the system you built becomes the thing that cannot be controlled?" His gaze held hers, steady, but this time, there was no immediate answer waiting behind it. No calculated response ready to deploy, just a fraction of hesitation. Small, controlled, but undeniable. And that was the shift. Elena felt it settle inside her, not as victory, not yet, but as confirmation. The balance had changed. Not completely, not safely, but enough. Enough to know that this was no longer a one-sided structure. Enough to know that every word she spoke now carried weight he could not ignore. The silence stretched again, longer this time, heavier, filled with everything neither of them had said yet, everything that still remained beneath the surface, waiting to surface at the right moment. And as they stood there, facing each other, neither stepping back, neither breaking eye contact, it became clear that this was not the end of the confrontation. Not even close. It was only the beginning of something far more dangerous, something neither of them had fully revealed yet, and something that was already moving beyond their control. Elena did not move, did not speak, did not break the silence that now stretched between them like something alive, something tightening with every second that passed. She could feel it, not just in the air, but in him, the shift that had started as a crack now widening into something he could no longer fully contain. And for the first time since this began, she did not wait for him to recover control. She took it. "You keep talking about what I do not understand," she said finally, her voice calm, steady, but carrying a weight that had not been there before. "So let me make this simple." She reached into her pocket slowly, deliberately, her movements controlled, never breaking eye contact as she pulled out her phone. Not rushed, not reactive, intentional. His gaze dropped for a fraction of a second, tracking the motion, and that alone was enough. Enough to confirm that he was no longer ahead of her. Elena lifted the screen slightly, just enough for him to see, not fully, not clearly, but enough to recognize what it represented. Access, data, structure, everything he had worked to keep invisible. "You built a system that depends on silence," she continued softly, her tone even, but sharper now, every word placed with precision. "On people not knowing where power actually lives." She took a step closer, closing the space between them completely now, not invading, not aggressive, but undeniable. "I do." The words did not need emphasis. They carried their own weight. He did not move back, but something in his posture shifted, just slightly, just enough to show that the distance she had closed mattered. "You think this gives you control," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled than before, but there was effort behind it, real effort, the kind that did not exist when control was natural. Elena tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady, her expression unreadable. "No," she said quietly. "I know it takes yours." The silence that followed was immediate. Heavy. Because this time, there was no space left for deflection, no angle left to redirect the conversation into something safer, something contained. She had removed it. Completely. Her thumb moved across the screen slowly, and his eyes followed again, just for a second, just enough. Elena saw it, registered it, understood exactly what that meant. "You asked me what instability creates," she continued, her voice almost softer now, but more dangerous for it. "Let me show you." She tapped the screen. Not dramatically, not loudly, just once. And then she lowered the phone again, her hand relaxed at her side, her gaze never leaving his. For a moment, nothing happened. The room stayed still. The air did not shift. The silence held. And then his phone vibrated. Not loudly, not repeatedly, just once. But it was enough. Enough to break something. His eyes flickered, not fully, not obviously, but Elena saw it. The smallest fracture in his focus as the notification registered, as whatever she had just done began to move through the system in real time. He did not reach for the phone immediately. He held his position. Tried to. But the delay was there. That hesitation. That moment of choice between maintaining control and reacting. Elena watched it happen, her breathing steady, her posture calm, because this was the moment she had been building toward. Not exposure. Not explanation. Impact. "You feel that?" she asked quietly, not mocking, not emotional, just stating what was already undeniable. That is what happens when something inside your system stops following your rules. His jaw tightened, more visibly now, his control still present, but no longer seamless, no longer effortless. The phone vibrated again, this time longer, more insistent. And this time, he reached for it. Not fully breaking eye contact, not completely losing control, but enough. Enough to show that the balance had shifted beyond recovery. Elena did not move, did not speak. She simply watched as the system she had once been excluded from now demanded his attention in ways he could not ignore. "You said it was necessary," she continued softly, her voice cutting through the tension with quiet precision. "That what happened to me was part of something bigger." Another vibration. His grip on the phone tightened slightly, his attention splitting now, no longer fully anchored in her, no longer fully in control of the moment. "Now it is bigger," she finished. The words landed, and this time, there was no response. No immediate counter. No controlled redirection. Just pressure. Real, visible pressure building in the space between them. Because now, he was no longer managing the situation. He was inside it. reacting to it, adjusting to something he did not initiate, something he could not immediately stop. Elena took a slow breath, her shoulders relaxed, her gaze steady, because this was the shift. Not symbolic, not subtle, real. The system was moving. And for the first time, it was not moving for him. The silence returned, but it was different now. Heavier, charged, filled with everything that had just changed, everything that could not be undone. Elena stood there, unmoving, completely present, completely in control of herself, while across from her, for the first time since she had met him, he was not fully in control of the moment. And neither of them spoke. The silence did not hold for long, because the system itself could not sustain it anymore. It started subtly, almost imperceptible, a ripple beneath the surface that only someone who understood the structure could recognize. Elena felt it before she saw it, the shift in rhythm, the loss of synchronization that had once defined everything inside these walls. His phone vibrated again, sharper this time, followed by another, and then another, not chaotic, but no longer controlled. He glanced down briefly, just enough for the crack to widen, just enough for the illusion of absolute command to slip further. Elena did not need to see the screen. She already knew what it would show. Conflicting reports, overlapping authorizations, internal flags rising in places that had never triggered before. The corridor she had accessed was no longer stable, and now it was affecting everything connected to it. She watched him carefully, not with satisfaction, not with emotion, but with clarity, because this was no longer about him. It was about what he represented, and what he represented was beginning to fracture. Somewhere deeper in the building, decisions were being made faster than they could be verified. The receptionist downstairs hesitated longer this time before answering a call, her voice no longer smooth, her tone carrying the first trace of uncertainty. In operations, someone double-checked an authorization that had never needed confirmation before. A guard paused, just for a second too long, waiting for an instruction that did not come immediately. Small moments, individually meaningless, but together, they formed a pattern. A system that had once moved like a single, seamless structure was now moving in pieces. Elena took a slow breath, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, because this was exactly what she had built toward. Not destruction, exposure. And exposure did the rest on its own. You feel it spreading, she said quietly, her voice cutting through. The tension without force, without urgency, just truth. He did not answer. But this time, his silence was not controlled. It was occupied. His attention split between her and the growing weight of everything unfolding around him. His control had not disappeared, but it was no longer absolute. And that difference was everything. The phone in his hand vibrated again, longer now, insistent, and this time, he looked at it fully. Just for a second. But that second was enough. Elena saw it in his eyes. Not panic, not fear, but something far more significant. Disruption. The kind that could not be immediately contained. Because now, it was not just one layer reacting. It was multiple, independently, without coordination. She stepped slightly to the side, not retreating, not advancing, just shifting her angle, her gaze sweeping the room briefly, taking in the subtle changes, the way people moved differently now, the way conversations shortened, the way attention flickered toward devices instead of staying anchored. The system was no longer invisible. It was visible in its hesitation. And once seen, it could not be unseen. You built something that depends on people not asking questions, she continued, her voice calm, but carrying further now, reaching beyond just him, touching the space itself. But the moment it stops making sense, they start looking. Another vibration, this time louder, not physically, but in effect. He straightened slightly, his posture tightening, trying to reclaim control, trying to reassert the structure that had defined him, but it no longer settled the way it used to. Because now, the system was not responding in one direction. It was responding in many. Elena watched it unfold, not as chaos, but as a chain reaction. One delay created another. One question led to another. One inconsistency forced another into view. And with each step, trust weakened. Not destroyed. Not yet. But weakened. Enough to matter. Enough to shift behavior. Enough to break rhythm. And rhythm was everything. Somewhere inside the building, someone raised a concern that would normally be dismissed. This time, it was not. Somewhere else, a decision was delayed, not because it had to be, but because no one was certain enough to move forward without confirmation. The system was not collapsing. It was hesitating. And that hesitation was the beginning of collapse. Elena's eyes returned to him, her expression steady, her presence grounded, because now, the dynamic between them had fully shifted. He was no longer the center of control. He was part of a system trying to regain it. And she was the reason it could not. "You do not need me to break it," she said softly. "It is already doing that on its own." The words landed without resistance, because there was nothing left to resist them with. The evidence was everywhere. In the air, in the silence, in the subtle, undeniable changes that could not be reversed by a single command. He exhaled slowly, his grip tightening slightly around the phone, his gaze returning to her. But this time, there was something else behind it. Not just calculation, not just control, recognition, not of defeat, not yet, but of reality. Elena held that gaze, her breathing even, her posture unchanged, because she understood what this moment meant. This was not the end. It was the threshold, the point where everything that had been hidden was now visible enough that it could no longer be ignored, but not yet resolved, not yet decided. The system was still standing, but it was no longer untouchable. And that meant there was only one thing left. One final move. One final step that would not just expose the truth, but force it into the open in a way no one could deny or contain. Elena's fingers relaxed slightly at her side, her eyes steady, her thoughts clear, because she knew exactly what that step was. And as the tension in the room tightened once more, heavier now, sharper, more fragile, it became clear that everything that had happened so far had only been preparation for what came next. Elena stood still as the system continued to shift around her, but for the first time since she had stepped into this world, she was not tracking it, not analyzing it, not adjusting to it. She was ahead of it, completely. The noise beneath the surface, the hesitation, the fractured responses, all of it had already been accounted for, already positioned, already aligned with what came next. Her breathing was steady, deeper now, not from tension, but from control, the kind that no longer needed to be proven, the kind that simply existed. Across from her, he remained where he was, his posture still strong, his presence still composed, but no longer untouched. The difference between them was no longer subtle. It was defined. He was managing what remained. She was deciding what came next. Elena's gaze drifted slightly past him, not dismissing him, but expanding beyond him, because now, he was no longer the center of the equation. The system was. And she could feel it clearly now, every layer she had touched, every weakness she had exposed, every pattern she had broken, all of it had led here. Not to chaos, to a single point of control. Her control. Her fingers moved slowly, almost absently, brushing against the edge of her phone, but she did not take it out yet. Not yet. Because this moment, this exact moment, was not about action. It was about certainty. She closed her eyes for just a second, not in hesitation, not in doubt, but in recognition of the distance she had traveled. From the woman who stood silent as her world collapsed around her, to the one standing here now, with the power to decide how this ended. The memory did not hurt anymore. It did not burn. It clarified. When her eyes opened again, there was nothing left unresolved inside her. No fear, no confusion, no need for validation. Only direction. He watched her carefully, his gaze sharper now, more focused, because he could feel it too, the shift that had gone beyond strategy, beyond positioning, into something final. "If you do this," he said, his voice lower now, more controlled than before, but not as absolute, not as certain, "there is no going back." Elena looked at him, really looked this time, not as an obstacle, not as an opponent, but as someone who had once stood on the other side of control. And for a brief moment, something passed between them. Not understanding, not agreement, just recognition. "There was never a way back," she replied quietly. The words were not sharp. They did not need to be. They carried the weight of everything that had already happened. The silence that followed was different now. Not tense, not uncertain. It was final. The kind of silence that comes before something irreversible. Around them, the building continued to function, but not the same way. The subtle fractures had deepened. Movements were less synchronized. Responses slightly delayed. The system was still standing, but it was no longer stable. And everyone inside it felt it. Elena turned slightly, her body shifting just enough to break the direct line between them, not as retreat, but as transition, because this was no longer about the confrontation. That part was already over. This was about outcome. Her hand moved, finally pulling the phone from her pocket, the screen lighting up instantly, reflecting in her eyes for just a second before she looked past it again, already knowing what it contained. Everything she needed, everything she had built, every layer of truth, every hidden connection, every point of failure that had been buried beneath silence. It was all there, ready, waiting, not to be discovered, to be released. Her thumb hovered over the screen, not trembling, not hesitating, just still, as if marking the boundary between what had been and what was about to be. Behind her, she could feel his attention sharpen, not because he knew exactly what she was about to do, but because he understood enough to recognize the weight of this moment. "You think this ends with exposure," he said quietly, his voice carrying something new now, something closer to urgency than control. "It does not. It changes everything." Elena's lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something calmer, something more certain. "That is the point," she said. And for the first time since she had met him, she did not wait for a response. She did not need one. Because this decision did not belong to him. It never had. Her gaze dropped to the screen, her focus narrowing, not to think, not to reconsider, but to act. Every piece was in place. Every variable aligned. Every outcome understood. There were no more unknowns. No more hesitation. Only consequence. Her thumb moved. And in that single, quiet motion, everything shifted from possibility to inevitability. Now she decides. Her thumb completed the motion, and for a moment, nothing changed on the surface. No alarms, no sudden reactions, no visible disruption. But Elena did not need visible confirmation. She understood systems well enough now to recognize that the most powerful shifts never announced themselves immediately. They settled first. Then they spread. Her screen dimmed slightly as the process executed, quiet, controlled, deliberate, just like everything she had built to reach this point. The data did not flood outward randomly. It moved with precision, routed through the same hidden corridors that had once been used to conceal truth, now repurposed to reveal it. Not all at once, not chaotically, but in sequence, in layers, enough to be undeniable, but structured enough to be understood. Elena lowered her hand slowly, slipping the phone back into her pocket, her posture steady, her breathing even, because her role in the moment had already been completed. What came next did not require force. It required time. Across from her, he remained still, his gaze fixed on her, but now there was no attempt to interrupt, no effort to regain control through words. He knew. Not the details. Not yet. But enough. Enough to recognize that something irreversible had just been set into motion. The silence between them deepened, but it no longer felt like tension. It felt like consequence waiting to arrive. Somewhere beyond the room, the first signs began to surface. A notification, subtle but out of place, appeared in a system channel that had never been meant for open review. Then another. Then a third. Small fragments of information, incomplete on their own, but connected in a way that made them impossible to ignore. A routing inconsistency. A timestamp that did not align. A record that had been adjusted without authorization. Each detail, by itself, explainable. Together, something else entirely. Elena did not look at her phone again, but she could feel it, the shift moving outward, touching layers that had once been sealed, forcing them to respond, to verify, to question. And questioning was the beginning of everything. In operations, someone paused longer than usual, staring at a screen, then calling for confirmation that should not have been necessary. In management, a conversation stopped mid-sentence as a detail surfaced that could not be easily dismissed. In security, a routine check extended just a few seconds too long, as if the person behind it sensed something was no longer aligning the way it should. It was not collapse. It was awareness. And awareness changed behavior. Elena turned her head slightly, her gaze moving across the room, not searching, not reacting, just observing, because this was the part that mattered most. Not the act itself, but its effect. The way control began to loosen not because it was taken, but because it could no longer justify itself. You did not expose everything, he said quietly, his voice lower now, more measured, but stripped of the certainty it once carried. Elena looked at him again, her expression calm, her thoughts clear. No, she replied softly. I exposed enough. The words settled between them, simple, precise, and complete. Because that was the difference between destruction and control. She had not released everything. She had not burned the system to the ground. She had chosen what to reveal, what to leave hidden, what to force into the light, and what to allow others to discover on their own. That choice was where her power lived now. His gaze remained on her, but there was something different behind it, not resistance, not denial, but something closer to understanding, the realization that this was not an act of chaos. It was an act of design. You could have destroyed it, he said. Elena held his gaze, her breathing steady, her voice quiet but firm. That was never the goal. Another pause followed, but this one was not empty. It carried weight, the weight of everything that had changed, everything that could not be undone. Because now, the system was no longer operating in silence. It was operating under observation. And observation demanded accountability. Elena shifted her stance slightly, not moving away, not stepping forward, just settling into the space she now occupied, fully, completely, without hesitation. She was no longer inside the system as an outsider. She was part of its reality now, a factor it had to account for. And that would never change. Beyond the room, the effects continued to build, not explosively, but steadily, as more details surfaced, as more questions were asked, as more assumptions were challenged. People who had once moved without thinking began to think. And once that happened, there was no going back. Elena exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxed, her expression calm, because this was what justice looked like to her. Not destruction, not revenge, but balance, restored in a way that forced everything to reveal its true shape. She turned slightly, her gaze shifting toward the exit, not leaving yet, not fully, but already moving forward in her mind, because her role here was complete. Behind her, the system continued to respond, adjusting, correcting, but never quite returning to what it had been. And that was the cost. Not immediate, not visible all at once, but real, because every layer she had touched now carried the weight of being seen, and everything that followed would have to exist under that weight. The system did not collapse. It settled, slowly, unevenly, like something adjusting to a weight it had never carried before. Elena could feel it in the air, not as tension anymore, but as a quiet recalibration, the kind that followed disruption when nothing could return to what it once was. The room around her no longer held the same sharp edge. Conversations resumed, but softer now, measured, as if every word passed through an extra layer of thought before being spoken. Movements continued, but with awareness, with hesitation that had not existed before. And that hesitation remained. He stood where he was, no longer trying to reclaim the moment, no longer forcing control into a space that had already moved beyond it. His posture was still composed, but it had changed, not weakened, not diminished, just different, grounded in something more real, something no longer built on absolute certainty. Elena watched him for a moment, not as an opponent, not as a threat, but as part of the same system she had just altered. And for the first time, there was no need to challenge him. No need to prove anything. The shift had already happened. It will not go back, he said quietly, his voice carrying less resistance now, more acknowledgement. Elena shook her head slightly, her expression calm, her tone even. It should not. The words were simple, but they held everything that needed to be said. Because going back was never the goal. Not for her. Not anymore. She turned slightly, her gaze moving across the room once more, but this time, she was not observing for weakness, not tracking patterns, not analyzing control. She was seeing it for what it had become. A system that still functioned, still operated, but no longer invisible, no longer unquestioned. And that difference would remain long after she left. The receptionist downstairs would answer calls differently now, not out of fear, but out of awareness. The guards would pause, just slightly, before following orders, not out of defiance, but out of thought. The people inside this building would still move, still work, still operate within the structure that had always existed, but now, they would know it could be seen. And that knowledge would shape everything. Elena's breathing slowed. Her shoulders relaxed, the weight she had carried for so long no longer pressing against her in the same way. It had not disappeared. It had transformed into something quieter, something steadier, something that did not demand action anymore. Only presence. He took a step back, not retreating, not yielding, just creating space, as if recognizing that the dynamic between them no longer required proximity to define it. You changed the balance, he said, his voice measured, reflective. Elena met his gaze one last time, her expression softening just slightly, not with sympathy, not with regret, but with clarity. No, she replied. I revealed it. Another silence followed, but this one was not heavy. It was open, the kind that comes when nothing is left unresolved, when everything that needed to be confronted has already been faced. She turned toward the exit, her steps slow, unhurried, each one carrying her further away from the moment that had defined everything and closer to something else. Not a new system, not a new position, just forward. The elevator doors opened as she approached, just as they had before, but this time, the movement did not feel like access granted. It felt like transition. She stepped inside, her reflection catching briefly in the polished surface, and for a second, she saw it clearly. The difference, not in what she wore, not in how she stood, but in how she looked at herself. There was no hesitation there anymore. No uncertainty, only recognition. The doors closed, and the descent began, smooth, steady, controlled. But now, she was not thinking about where she was going next. She was not planning another move. She was not calculating another outcome. For the first time in a long time, she was still. When the doors opened again, the lobby felt quieter, even though nothing had visibly changed. The receptionist glanced up, her eyes meeting Elena's for a brief second before looking away, not dismissive, not uncertain, just aware. And that was enough. Elena walked past her, past the desk, past the marble floor where everything had once begun, and out through the glass doors into the open air. The city moved the same way it always had. Cars passing, people walking, conversations blending into a steady rhythm. Nothing had changed out here. And yet, everything had changed for her. She paused for just a moment on the sidewalk, her gaze lifting slightly, not searching, not questioning, just taking in the space around her without needing to control it, without needing to understand it. Because now, she did not need to. The system she had confronted would continue. It would adapt. It would rebuild its rhythm. But it would never be the same. And neither would she. Elena took a slow breath, her shoulders easing fully for the first time. The tension that had once driven her now replaced by something quieter, something deeper. Not victory. Not relief. Balance. She stepped forward again, blending into the movement of the city, no longer standing apart from it, no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by what she had chosen to do in response. And as the noise of the world settled around her, steady, constant, unchanged, there was a calm that followed, not empty, not distant, but real, the kind that only comes after everything has already been faced, already been decided, already been set into motion, leaving behind nothing but the quiet, lasting echo of a storm that had finally passed. Elena did not look back as she walked, not at the building, not at the people inside it, not at the version of herself that had once stood there, silent, unseen, dismissed. Because that version no longer existed. Not in the way it once had. The city moved around her with its usual rhythm, steady, indifferent, untouched by what had happened behind those glass walls. But she no longer felt small inside it. She no longer moved through it as someone waiting to be allowed space. She moved as someone who understood it, who could read the invisible lines beneath it, who knew where power lived and how easily it could shift when exposed to the light. Her steps were unhurried, her posture relaxed, her gaze clear, but there was something in her presence now that could not be ignored, not because she demanded attention, but because she no longer needed it. That was the difference. She had once been defined by what others saw, by how they treated her, by the silence they imposed on her existence. Now, she was defined by what she chose to see, what she chose to act on, and what she refused to accept. The memory of that moment, the cart hitting the floor, the eyes that looked past her, the voices that spoke as if she were not there, it still existed, but it no longer carried weight. It carried meaning. It was not a wound anymore. It was a reference point. The exact moment everything began. And the reason everything changed. Elena slowed slightly as she reached the edge of a crosswalk, the red light holding her in place for just a moment, not as a barrier, but as a pause. Around her, people stood waiting, checking their phones, shifting their weight, lost in their own routines, unaware of the quiet transformation that had just taken place in the world they shared. And for the first time, she did not feel separate from them. She felt aware of them, aware of how easily systems formed around silence, how quickly people accepted what they did not question, how often power hid in plain sight simply because no one chose to look directly at it. Her eyes lifted slightly, scanning the buildings across the street, not searching, not analyzing, just observing, because now she understood something she had not understood before. The system had never been just one place. It was everywhere, in structures, in habits, in expectations, and in the quiet agreement to not disrupt what appeared to be working. But she had disrupted it, not by force, not by breaking it apart, but by refusing to remain invisible inside it. The light changed. People began to move. Elena stepped forward with them, her pace steady, her direction clear, but her mind no longer fixed on what had happened. It was already behind her. What remained was what she carried forward. Not anger, not revenge, something sharper, something more lasting. Understanding, the kind that did not fade when the moment passed, the kind that reshaped how she saw everything that came after. Somewhere behind her, the system would continue. It would adjust. It would rebuild its patterns, create new layers, find new ways to maintain control. That was its nature, but it would never be untouched again. It would never be invisible in the same way, because now someone had seen it clearly, and that changed everything. Elena reached the other side of the street, her steps slowing just slightly as she moved past a row of windows, her reflection catching her eye again. But this time, she did not pause. She did not study it. She did not question it, because she already knew what she would see. Not the person who had been pushed aside, not the one who had been used as a distraction, but someone who had stood inside the system, understood it, and chosen to change it without becoming it. That was the difference that mattered. Not power for the sake of control, not dominance for the sake of recognition, but clarity, the ability to see what was hidden and the strength to act on it without losing herself in the process. Her phone remained silent now. No more alerts, no more signals pulling her attention back into something she had already finished. The world ahead of her was open again, not because it had changed, but because she had. She no longer needed permission to move through it. She no longer needed validation to exist within it. She simply did. And that was enough. The city stretched out in front of her, endless, layered, filled with systems she now understood in a way she never had before. But for the first time, she did not feel the need to control any of it. She only needed to remember one thing. That power does not belong to those who hide it best, but to those who see it clearly enough to decide what to do with it. Elena kept walking, her steps steady, her presence quiet, but undeniable, leaving behind a system that would never forget her, even if it tried to pretend otherwise, because once something has been seen, truly seen, it can never return to being invisible again. And as the noise of the city carried on around her, blending into something constant, something familiar, something unchanged, one truth remained, simple, sharp, and impossible to ignore, the kind that lingers long after everything else fades away. They did not lose control when I fought back. They lost it the moment I understood it.